Welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
When I was a kid, I was always jealous of the kids who could just walk home from school. They didn't have to wait on their bus or on their parents. They'd be back home in a few minutes, enjoying a fruit roll-up, and could actually catch the cool after-school cartoons. Not me, though. My bus ride took an hour. That never changed, you see, because some folks still walk to and from work these days. And tonight I've got a story for you about one Swedish listener who took a walk home after a stormy night, only to realize he's not alone, and his companion is very tall and very quiet. That story and more in today's episode. These are Tales from the Break Room. Before we begin, I wanted to tell you that you can help EerieCast and Tales from the Break Room stay alive no matter what, and you can listen to exclusive stories narrated by me that you've never heard before. All you have to do is head over to eerie.fm and sign up to be a premium member. I've prepared dozens of hours of members-only horror just for you over there, like a brand new Unexplained Encounters After Hours story about a possibly haunted bag of dog bones. Every premium member is a supporter helping us thrive. Thank you to everyone who has signed up so far. You are incredible. And by the way, you look good enough for a promotion here at Dead and Roasted. That's EERIE.fm. There was something else on sonar. From Curtis TVA. Inland diving is the part of commercial diving that no one wants. The water in the lakes and the rivers I worked has zero visibility. You usually have to work by feel. The current will kill you if the sluice gates open wrong, and the cold will kill you on its own if your suit fails. I did inland work for 12 years out of East Tennessee, and I'm not going to do it again. I worked a lot of jobs for TVA, which is what Tennessee Valley Authority gets called by people who work for it. The dam jobs are bread and butter for inland divers in our part of the country. We do debris clearance on the intake trash racks, or inspection of the spillway gates and such. The water in most of those reservoirs has 6 inches of visibility at the surface and 10 feet down. You go in on a stage and get lowered to depth, and you work in pitch black with a comms umbilical to the tinder on the surface. My tinder for most of my career was a guy I'll call Roger for the sake of this story. Roger was good. He was clear on the comms and never panicked, and he kept track of you the whole dive. The third guy in our usual team was VJ. Yes, I know that sounds hilarious, but that's what we called him, VJ. VJ was older than both of us and had done the job since before saturation diving was a thing. VJ mostly tended in his later years, but he kept his commercial card current and would suit up if we got short. We were on a contract at one of the larger dams that I am not going to name for privacy reasons. The job was a debris clearance on an intake grate at about 90 feet. We'd been on the job for 2 days. It was straightforward work. You feel your way to the rebar of the grate and you find the bigger pieces of debris hung up on it. Usually around here that would be just logs, maybe some fish. Then you wrestle them loose. The current is shut off topside while you work, but you can still feel it pull at you when the sluice gates downstream do their thing. I was on the 3rd dive of the day. I'd been down maybe 12 minutes when Roger came over on comms.
Curtis, you got somebody else down there with you?
I didn't say anything just yet. I'd been getting my arm in behind a log to find where it had caught on the grate, and I had to back out before I could focus on what he had said. Say again, Roger?
Sonar showing 2 returns, you and somebody else. Bigger than a fish.
There's nobody down here, Roger. Just me and the grate.
If you say so, but I'm seeing something bigger than a carp and person-shaped. Hold up, I'll go get VJ.
I stopped moving. Inland diving teaches you to be still very fast if something's going wrong. The current wasn't running, and the water was a black pressure around the outside of my helmet, and that's it. So I waited to hear back from Roger.
Curtis, VJ's at the screen. He says it's a body.
What? I thought. I took a deep breath, then asked, Okay, what do you want me to do?
Just stay where you are. We're trying to figure out if it's a real return or a glitch in the unit.
So I stayed where I was, again. The thing about pitch black water is that all you have are the thoughts in your head. I was at 90 feet of cold water in the dark with no actual stimulus other than the inside of my helmet and Roger's voice. That's when I felt something brush my left wrist. The wrist was outside my glove where the dry suit seal met the glove cuff. And I swear to you now, if you're reading or listening to this, that I felt fingers. I instantly began to yell. Roger, get me up. Get me up right now. A hand just touched my wrist. Roger did not hesitate. I'm grateful that he listened right away without a question.
All right, calm down. You're coming up. We got you. Hold on.
Then it grabbed me, and the hand was strong. This was not the grip, quote-unquote, of a corpse. It was a deliberate grip, with all 5 fingers, and the fingers were colder than the water. The grip held for about 4 seconds, then let go of me, and I felt nothing else, until the line started to pull me up. They had me on the surface in under a minute. Roger and VJ were both at the rail. Roger was talking on the radio to somebody else. VJ was standing a few steps back from the rail with one hand on the safety bar and looking at me. I rapidly took off my helmet. My arm was shaking. It freaking grabbed me. Roger, the sonar, VJ called to Roger. Still there. The return's still on the screen. You said the hand let you go? Yeah, it grabbed me and let me go. I stayed sitting down on the dock. I could not feel my legs. VJ stayed at the rail and watched the one screen with Roger. After a minute, VJ spoke up again. I'm gonna go down. Roger looked at him. VJ, no, that's not a good idea. I'll go down. Curtis is shook up, look at him. We can't leave it there, and we can't pull off this contract on day 3. I'll go down. VJ, suit me up. And so VJ went down. He was on the bottom for about half an hour. Roger talked to him on comms the whole time, and we both watched the screen. The second return, the human-shaped thing, didn't move. VJ's return moved around it, circled it twice, and stopped near it longer than I expected, then came back to the line. VJ came up calmly and slowly. When his helmet came off, he didn't say a word. Instead, he carefully removed his gear. When that was done, he walked over to the cooler and got a Coke and began to drink. VJ, what did you see? Nothing. Can't see a dang thing down there. You know what I mean. Did you feel anything? What happened? Yep, I felt something. I'm done. You're done? Roger looked surprised. Done with the day. Done with the contract for today. Just call the regional supervisor. So Roger did that. The regional came down in his truck and had a long conversation with VJ, but we didn't hear it. Afterwards, the crew packed up and we went home. The next morning, the second return was no longer on the sonar. VJ went down again. He was on the bottom for about 40 minutes and did the clearance himself. He came up, took the suit off, signed the log, and went home. The contract finished out without anything else happening. I worked with VJ for another 5 years. I eventually stopped asking him what he had felt on the bottom of that intake, because he never answered. We kept working jobs together, we ate lunch together when we could. VJ's daughter got married a couple of years later, and he had me at the wedding. He retired in 2017, and we stayed in touch by phone. I tried asking about it again in 2019, when I'd been off the bottle for about 8 months. We were on the phone, and I brought it up. Hey, you remember that, second return at the dam that one time? You know what I mean. What was that all about? Like, are you ever going to tell me what happened?
Well, you know what you felt, Curtis?
Yeah, I remember what I felt. Doubt I'll ever forget it.
Well, the easy way to put it is that it was the same thing. Cold, cold, cold fingers on a hand. Just be thankful that it touched you and you didn't touch it.
VJ, what does that mean? He hung up. Dang it, I thought. I was clearly never going to get a real answer from him. And when he died in 2022, the answer would forever escape me, if there even was one. In 2018, I stopped doing inland work. Very thankful that I did. If I ever go swimming in the lake or in the ocean, though, and something skims past my leg, I freak out. But I have a good reason for that. Someone knocked on my truck cab at a rest area. From Petoskey Stone. I drove long haul for decades. It's something I sort of had to get into after a knee injury ended my construction career back in '94. I needed something that didn't beat up my back. I'd been a framing carpenter on commercial builds for 15 years before that, mostly hospitals and schools. The knee was a job site fall. A piece of subfloor gave out under me on a hospital expansion, and I went down 6 feet into rebar. A few surgeries later, the doctor told me I could go back to framing, or I could keep walking when I was 60. I picked what everyone else would probably pick, walking. So I got my CDL. I did short runs for a year, then moved up to long haul. I liked that solo aspect. My wife liked the money and didn't mind the time part. We'd been married for nearly a decade when I switched, and we didn't have kids yet, which made the schedule easier for us. She worked at a credit union in our town and had her routines, and she had her sister around to keep her company. I'd be gone 4 or 5 nights a week and home on weekends. She said it was like having a normal husband with extra weeks of vacation built in. Wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. But maybe it was good, because we stayed together for 33 years, though she passed in 2019, God bless her soul. The driving was good to us. There were a few jobs over the years that stayed with me forever. The one I think about a lot was a stop I made at a rest area, someplace in Michigan, about 12 years back. I was running a load of industrial bearings from Detroit up to a mining operation outside Marquette. It didn't need refrigeration and it wasn't time sensitive, which meant I could take it slow on the haul and not push too hard through the night. Plus, it was a route I was used to. It's a haul that goes up I-75 across the Mackinac Bridge, and then about 3 hours west on US 2 along Lake Michigan. The route has rest areas every 50 miles or so. I usually stopped once on a long haul to sleep 4 hours and eat. I had a favorite stop a little further up, near St. Ignace. They had a hot food vending machine that did decent burritos, and my mouth was watering. But that stop had been closed for renovation that month, so, disappointed, I had to push up onto the next one. That night I pulled into a small rest area between Manistee and Escanaba. One of those places that only has a vending machine, some bathrooms, and some picnic tables. No cameras I could see. No attendants. Places like this folks usually use during the day, and those folks are usually retirees on car trips, and at night they're truckers like me. I think I'd pulled into it 3 or 4 times over the years, but it was rare. It was around 2 a.m. The lot had one other truck in it, an unmarked dry van, dark in color, and parked at the far end. That truck was running its engine on idle, which some guys do when they're sleeping inside and want the cab to be nice and warm. I didn't see any lights on inside, though. I figured the driver was sleeping. I pulled in 2 slots over so I could swing out easy in the morning. I sat in my cab eating a sandwich and a banana, watching the road through the windshield. Suddenly, I heard 3 quiet taps on my driver's side door, about 4 feet up. Quiet enough that I almost didn't hear them over the diesel engine's idling. My door is up high. To tap there, a person would have to be tall or standing on the step. I leaned over to the window and took a look outside. There was a guy on my truck step looking back at me. A white guy in his late 30s, dark hair, and he looked soaked. His shirt and pants were wet through, and his hair was matted to his head. He wasn't wearing a coat, though the temperature outside was in the 40s. His face was clean, no marks and no expression. He looked at me through the glass, and I didn't open the door. I didn't even move. He then took a step back, still looking at me, before walking off across the parking lot toward the trees on the far side. That was about 30 yards of grass between the asphalt and the tree line. He walked it slow, not looking back again. I lost sight of him in the trees. I tried to sleep after that, but couldn't. I kept the doors locked and the engine and headlights off, but I had the cab light on, and I stayed sitting up. Around 4 a.m., the idling engine on the other truck cut off. It was unexpected, and it got that loud quiet. You know, when the only sound around suddenly shuts off, and you're left with that quiet ringing in your ears. It actually made me jump a little. I sat there in silence afterward, and waited for the sun to come up. At dawn, I got out to use the bathroom, and that other truck was gone. Air brakes hiss when a truck pulls out, but I had never heard them hiss. I knew the engine had cut off 4 hours earlier, but I didn't know when the truck had left. Just before I entered the bathroom, I noticed something. On the bathroom door, taped at eye level, was a missing person flyer. The flyer was old, the paper was turning yellow, and the tape on it dried out and curled at the edges. Someone had put it up months ago and had not yet taken it down. I didn't usually care about flyers, but this one was right in my face when I went in. The person on the flyer was a white man in his late 30s with dark hair. He was at a wedding and smiling. There was a name on it. The flyer said he had last been seen at this rest area about 6 months ago. It asked for anyone with information to call a number at the bottom. It was the same guy, the same man who had tapped on my cab. I stood at the bathroom door for a minute, looking at the flyer. Then I went in and used the bathroom. I came back out, and the flyer was still there. Of course it was. I looked at it again, just to be sure it was the same guy. No doubt about it. I drove on to Marquette and made my drop. I took my 4 hours and drove back south the same route. The rest area was empty when I went through it. The flyer was still on the bathroom door when I checked again. Honestly, I don't know what I was expecting. I told the guy at the yard who took the truck back from me about it. He simply told me what another driver had told him a year before. It was about the same rest area. Said that a man went to his window and tapped on the door before walking off into the trees. Said the guy reported it, but nothing came of it. I looked into the man's name from the flyer, even went back to get the number. I called the number, and no one would pick up, so I left a voicemail. Having looked up the information, apparently the man was married with 2 daughters, and he was an engineer at one of the iron mines outside Marquette. His car had been found in the rest area the day after he was reported missing. His wallet had been left in the glove box, and his phone on the driver's seat, and by that point no one knew what happened to him. It's just so bizarre, accidentally becoming part of a missing persons case, and to know that he's still alive, still out there, and yet he doesn't want to be found. But what does he want? Why does he go to truckers' windows when they're trying to sleep and tap on the doors? Is he still alive? Was he alive when I saw him at my window? Or was that something else? Phantom in the Container. From Scotty. I was 7 the first time I had something happen that made me a believer. My grandparents lived in an old farmhouse out in the country. I used to stay over there sometimes when my mom picked up extra shifts. They had a spare room upstairs, where my grandma made a little nest of blankets for me on the floor, as the bed had busted springs. One night I woke up to a sound like marbles rolling around. Glass on wood, slow, going one direction then coming back. The attic was right over that spare room, and nobody used it anymore since the ladder had cracked. I lay there with my eyes wide, listening to it roll in what felt like a circle. Then one hard knock on the floorboards right above my head, like somebody had brought their fist down really hard. I bolted out of there and into my grandparents' room. My grandpa got up with his flashlight and his old single shot, walking the hallway in his pajamas. He stood under the attic panel and listened. He came back and told me it was just squirrels. I could tell that wasn't the truth. In the morning, I asked my grandma about it, and even she acted suspicious. But she did say that her mother had heard things in that attic too, back when she was a girl, and that the house had always been a little funny. She said as long as you didn't go looking for it, it didn't bother you. Then she put another pancake on my plate and told me to eat up. I'm in my 40s now and drive a truck for a living. Mostly paper goods, toilet paper, paper towels, and those big industrial rolls. The trailer carries pallets of cases all strapped down. These are pretty light loads and easy hauls. Been doing it for a couple years now. This happened about a year ago. I had a delivery to a warehouse a few hours south. I'd left later than I wanted to since the loading dock was running behind. By the time I was on the highway out in the middle of nowhere, it was getting dark. I was somewhere out in the flatlands when I heard the first thump from the back. Just a single dull sound. Cargo shifts sometimes if it's not strapped in right, or if you hit a bad bump, so I let off the gas a little and kept going. A few minutes after that, it happened again. Only this time it sounded like something tumbled around. Maybe a case or two had come off the top of a pallet and was rolling about. I cussed, since a messy trailer means the warehouse guys give you a hard time on the unload. I dropped my speed down and tried to keep things smooth. But then I heard what I swore sounded like footsteps. It wasn't a thumping sound like cargo, but footsteps, walking slow from the front of the trailer toward the back. A few steps, then a pause, and a few more. The cab is insulated, but you can hear things in the trailer if they're loud enough. And this was loud enough. I told myself it had to be the suspension, or maybe I was tired. I told myself a whole list of things while I began to look for somewhere to pull off the road. The road climbed a low hill, and at the top there was one of those little rural water treatment plants, behind a big chain-link fence. There was nothing else around. The shoulder was wide enough that I could get the rig off the road, so I pulled over there and I killed the engine. I sat in the cab for just a moment, trying to force myself to get out. I then grabbed my flashlight from the door pocket and walked around. The metal was cooling off and I could hear it ticking. I undid the latches and swung one of the doors open, and I stood there, shining my light in. The first thing I saw was that I'd been right about the cargo. There were cases knocked over toward the back, and a bunch of wrapped rolls scattered across the floor. Not as bad as it could have been, but I didn't see an animal or a person and nothing moving around. I let out a breath. I was about to climb up and start fixing some of it when I felt a shift in the air. Something at the very front of the trailer started to move towards me. Fast. The only way I knew it was there was because of the disturbances around it. As it moved, the paper goods around it began to ripple like a wave, starting from 60 feet back, rolls blowing outward against the walls and up into the air as it came through. A couple of cases got knocked sideways off the pallets as whatever it was passed. Then it went through me. I felt a forearm hit my chest, definitely a forearm, followed by a hand grabbing my shoulder for half a second and letting go. I got spun a half turn and almost dropped the flashlight. Behind me out on the asphalt, I heard footsteps moving away. 3 or 4 of them, heavy, sounded like boots, going off down the road in the direction I'd just come from. I stood there with my back to the open trailer, my flashlight pointing at the road, and absolutely nothing on the road to point it at. My shoulder was warm where the hand had been. My legs really didn't want to move at that moment. Eventually, I got the door shut. I climbed back into the cab and drove the rest of it too fast for the load I was hauling. My dispatch called once and I let it ring. When I pulled into the lot, the warehouse manager came out and saw the inside of that trailer. And of course, he got on me for 15 minutes about driving like a lunatic and messing up his unload schedule. I let him. There's not much I could have said to not get in trouble at that point. I called my mom that night from a motel and told her about the whole thing. She told me Grandma used to say spirits sometimes hitch rides, that they can get on at one place and get off at another. And when that happens, you just let them off. Don't ask any questions. I asked her if she believed that. She said she didn't know what she believed, but she believed my story. I still run that route sometimes. When I do, I keep the radio up, and anything I hear in the back is no longer my business. The Man with the Head, from Cherry Bulsum. I'll start by saying this isn't really my story. The horror here happened to someone else, someone who didn't make it home that night. But I was there, or near enough to there, and I'm the one who has to live with it, with what I heard and with what I saw, so I guess I get to tell my part. I'm 31. I work the front desk at an office building. I still work there. It's mostly insurance stuff and a couple of small firms that rent space. Think there's a tax office on the second floor, too. The building has maybe 40 employees total when everyone's in, which isn't always. We have a big lot out front and a smaller one in the back for staff. There are trees on one side, a road on the other, and a couple of empty commercial lots nearby. And I can say that this happened in Minnesota in the late 2010s. So my job is the most boring job in the world, answering phones and signing people in. But sometimes I do get to water the plants in the lobby, so that's nice. I bring a book to work most days and get through maybe 100 pages a shift. Some days the only person I talk to is the FedEx guy. Usually I leave at 5, but a few times a month I have to stay late for whatever reason. Some of the partners work late, and they like having someone at the desk in case a client needs to be buzzed in. On those nights, I'm the one who locks up and sets the alarm. Unless the cleaners are coming, then the cleaners do it. But they only come twice a week. On the night in question, they weren't coming. If I recall correctly, it was a Thursday. I'd been there since 7:30 in the morning, as one of the partners had an early thing. I was tired. My back was killing me from sitting all day. I just wanted to go home and put something stupid on TV. The last partner left around 8:45. I did my walk around, made sure the bathrooms were empty and the conference room lights were off, and I came back to my desk, grabbing my bag and my keys. Time to call it a day. I locked up the front, arming the system through the little keypad by the door. Then I walked out toward my car. The back lot has those tall lights on poles, 3 altogether, and they're all right, but they don't really get into the corners. My car was parked about halfway down. I was digging in my bag for my phone, since I always call my husband on the way home. That's when the screaming started. It came from past the edge of the lot, somewhere out in the dark where there's a strip of grass and then the road, then some empty commercial lots. It was coming from a man, I was sure of it. He was screaming like he was being killed, like his guts were being ripped out. The first one was loud and went on way too long. Then it broke into a second that was much higher pitched. But then he started to make another noise, a wet noise, like he was trying to scream through something filling up his throat. I gotta be honest, I didn't move. I stood there in the parking lot with my hand still in my bag, and I didn't move for what felt like a long time, but was maybe just 4 or 5 seconds. I'm not sure my brain was even working, but I kept hearing the man scream. I made a run for my car. I got to the driver's side and hit the unlock button on my fob, and nothing happened. I hit it again 3 times, 4 times. Nothing. I pulled at the handle anyway, but it didn't budge. That fob worked when I came to work that morning. It worked at lunch when I went and got a salad from the place down the road. It just sat there in my hand like it was now dead. And that is what it turned out to be. The screaming stopped while I was standing at my car door. It cut off with a last wet sound, then went completely quiet. In a panic, I started to head back toward the building. I wasn't running just yet. I think I was kind of half walking, half stumbling, because my legs felt weak. But that's when I heard someone talking. A man's voice as well, quiet, kind of sing-song, coming from out there past the lot. I couldn't make out the words, or they were words I couldn't understand anyway. It sounded like he was saying the same thing over and over. I turned to look, involuntarily. My body just did it on its own. I shouldn't have looked. I wish I didn't. There's a low concrete divider at the edge of our lot, and past that, there's some grass and then the road. He was just on the other side of the road, standing there in the dark between 2 of the streetlights, where it's hard to see. But I could see his shape, and I could see he had something in each hand. One of those somethings was a knife, a big knife. I could see it glinting in the light when it moved. The other thing he was holding by hair. It took me a moment to realize what I was looking at. My brain kept trying to make it be something else, a bag or a mask, something somebody would actually carry normally. But it wasn't those things. He was holding another man's decapitated head. I couldn't make a sound. Even though my body wanted me to scream, I couldn't do it. It was like my throat closed up, and nothing would come out. I ran for the front door of the building, not the back. I went all the way around, since the front door is the one I had the keys for. I got the key in on maybe the 3rd try. My hands were trembling fiercely, and I had trouble punching in the alarm code. The keypad beeped at me twice for wrong entries before I finally got it. I shut the door behind me, locked it, and slid down the wall dialing 911 from the floor. The dispatcher was very calm with me, but I was not calm. I was telling her there was a man with a head outside. A head. And she kept telling me to slow down, to tell her where I was. The cops got there fast. I could see the lights through the front windows. They found him. Pretty quickly, too. Although I couldn't tell much more than that night. And I wasn't told much. What I would learn later, mostly from the news, was that the victim was a man in his 50s who worked at one of the other businesses on that road. He had been walking to his car like I was that night. The man who did it wasn't even from here. They said in the news there was a religious component to it, that he believed he was supposed to do what he did, that he'd come into this country with that intention or had developed it after getting here. That part they weren't sure of. They didn't really explain more than that. I don't think anyone could really explain. I quit for about 6 weeks, but then I came back since I needed the money, and the partners were good to me about it. I only work days now. They got a security guy who comes in at 5 and stays until close. which they should have done all along. The back lot has more lights now, too, and I got my key fob's battery replaced. Works without a hitch now. Still, I think about that night, how I was maybe 50 yards away from a man who had been decapitated by another man, and that could have been me. I thought it was a person. From Schmert, 49. I'm 34 years old. I live in Sweden in a smallish town not too far from Göteborg. My job is to work at a warehouse on the edge of town for a clothing distributor. For a long time, I didn't have a car. Cars cost a lot here, and gas costs a lot too, and insurance costs a lot. I lived close enough to the warehouse that walking made more sense for me. About a 40-minute walk if I wasn't distracted. 50 on a bad day. My shift started in the afternoon and ended late, sometimes 11 at night, sometimes later if we had a big order going out the door. So I'd walk in during daylight and walk home in the dark. I'd been doing these walks for maybe a year and a half. The walk goes through town for a bit, then there's a section, about 15 minutes of it, where the road cuts through woods. Real forest, so dense with underbrush you can't walk through it, unless you're crazy. The road is paved but narrow, and there are no streetlights along that stretch. During the day, it's one of the most scenic walks you could ask for. You can hear birds and smell the pine. Sometimes you see a hare cross in front of you. I used to look forward to that part on the way in. Walking home at night, I didn't really think about it. I would have headphones in, and I had my thoughts with me, so the dark didn't scare me and I really didn't notice it. Until this happened. This occurred in autumn. It was cold, and the leaves were changing. There was a storm that evening, a pretty bad one, with rain coming sideways and wind that made you nervous about the roof. It started about an hour before my shift ended, and was still going pretty bad when we were done. A few of us stayed in the break room and waited it out. I had a coffee with an older guy named Mikhail, and for some time we talked about football. Sometime after midnight, the rain finally let up. Mikhail's wife came to pick him up, and I told one of the other guys I was just gonna walk it. He looked at me funny, but didn't say anything else. Really, I should have asked for a ride, but I didn't. Outside, the air was heavy and wet, and the road was shining. There was mist coming up off the ground in patches, and you could see it move through the lot lights. I put my hood up, and I started to walk, same as I always did. The town part of the walk was great. A few cars went past, streetlights were on, everything looked clean and washed. I felt pretty good, actually. I like that crisp look and feel after a storm has just gone, and everything is quiet again. Eventually I got to the woods, and I noticed right away how much darker they were than a usual night. Cloud cover was still thick, and the moon was only getting through in little bits. The mist was heavier in there too, sitting low between the trees, drifting across the road. I could only see about 20 meters in front of me when the moonlight hit right, and that wasn't very often. I'd been on that stretch for maybe a couple of minutes when I noticed there was someone walking ahead of me. The road bent a little, and when the moon caught the bend, I saw the figure walking. They were tall. I'm 180 centimeters, around 65 kilos, on the thinner side. This person was taller than me, quite a bit, maybe 2 meters and thinner, which was a surprise to see someone that tall yet thinner than me. The shoulders were narrow, and the arms looked long. I could only see them from behind. I assumed they were wearing dark clothes, or maybe just dark from the wet. I couldn't really tell. My assumption was it was someone from town walking home just like me. Maybe someone had been at the bar a little too long, or finishing a late shift. Their pace was steady and calm, not in a hurry, so I kept my pace as well. I didn't want to catch up to them since it's awkward to walk right behind a stranger in the dark, but I didn't want to slow down either. It was cold, and I was ready to get home. For a while, it was just the two of us, me and the person ahead, walking through that wooded stretch with the mist around us. I'd say it went on for another 15 minutes, give or take, which usually would have been the end of the stretch by now, but we were taking a much slower, careful pace. I remember thinking it was a little strange that this person ahead of me never looked back. People usually do look back or look around, especially when they hear someone behind them. Even just a quick glance. This person did not. They just walked. Eventually, I started to feel uncomfortable, though I really couldn't say why. Their walk didn't seem right. I told myself I was just being paranoid, so I turned up my music and ignored it. The woods began to thin out. I could see the lights of town up ahead, the first streetlight after the bend, and the edges of buildings. We were almost out of the trees, and I felt relieved. I was thinking about getting home, getting out of my wet clothes, and what I was going to eat. The figure was still about 15 meters ahead of me. As we came into the dappled light at the edge of the woods, where the streetlight from town was just starting to reach, they finally turned. Their upper body twisted, the shoulders came around, and the head came around with it. They looked at me over their shoulder while still walking forward. I lost my breath in that very moment. I made some kind of sound, but it wasn't a scream, even though I wanted to. That wasn't a human face I was looking at, not a human head. What I saw was a long snout like an animal's, and the mouth was open a little, and I could see teeth inside it. The eyes were set back along the snout, and they caught the streetlight. They went bright for a moment, like a dog's eyes reflecting light. It looked at me for just a couple of seconds. Its head was still turning forward again, and the body was still walking forward, and the legs had not broken their stride. Eventually, it turned its head back the rest of the way and veered right off the road and into the trees, into that underbrush I said people wouldn't normally walk into because it's too thick. It did so effortlessly, in a calm, two-legged walk. The mist and darkness in the trees quickly swallowed it up, and I couldn't see it anymore. I stopped then, just stopped right there in the road. I was breathing really hard. I couldn't make my legs move anymore, and my hands felt numb. In my head, I was just arguing with myself about what I just saw. Was it real? Was it a person in a costume? Or did I just spot the most insane-looking animal of all time? At the same time, I was still trying to figure out if it was still in those trees right next to me, watching. The thought of it just off the road, only a few meters in the woods, looking back at me through the trunks. That was what finally got me moving. I ran, and I have not run like that since I was a kid. I sprinted past the spot where it had gone into the trees as fast as I could, eyes forward, panting like a madman. I kept on running until I was well into the town part of the road, lights all around me and even a few people. The remainder of the walk or run home I don't even remember. The next thing I knew, I was at my apartment, walking inside, more grateful than ever to be back home. I only ever told one person about this experience, specifically my brother, because I was trying to explain to him why I suddenly wanted a car. He's the practical type, and he thought it was a good idea anyway, monster on the wooded road or not. I had enough put away in a couple of months to buy something old and small, and that's what I drive even now. I have no idea what that was. My brother showed me pictures of bears standing up, mooses even, strange cryptid photos he found on Google, but none of that matched. A bear doesn't walk like that, and it isn't that thin. And a moose does not have that shape, let alone that face. Thank God I don't walk home anymore. True stories of a geriatric nurse in Germany. From Stefan, Germany, 1903. First of all, I wanted to say that I love the way you tell all those stories. I stumbled over them during a night shift on YouTube, and they're a part of my night shifts ever since. I'm a male geriatric nurse working in a nursing home for elderly people in Germany, and at this time I'm 29 years old. I've never been a skeptic when it comes to the supernatural or unexplainable, and I wouldn't say that I get spooked easily. Maybe because I've already witnessed bad things from a very young age, since I started working in nursing homes when I was 14. I've experienced various, mystical or unexplainable things during my time at work, and I thought, why don't I just share them with you? Because in my job I work with very personal and intimate data, I won't share any names of my elderlies, but I'll try to keep as many details in these stories as I legally can. Number 1. The first time I witnessed something suspicious or nearly supernatural was when I was 18 and just started getting serious in my job by freshly entering a professional internship to become a geriatric nurse. My colleagues and I were sitting in the office room of the elderly home, doing our break. Right at the opposite side of the office was a room, empty at the time, because the man who was living in there had died only a few days ago. He had been a nice man, caring for some of the other people living with us, like helping them to cut their meals in comfortable bits, or filling up their glasses with water or tea or other beverages. I was eating my sandwich that I prepared for that day when all of a sudden, exactly that room started to ring. When we say a room where a patient is ringing, we mean that they pressed the call button in their room to call for us. This causes a little red lamp over their door to light up, and a soft bell starts to ring to alarm us that the person needs something. That empty room ringed. I gave a look to my colleagues and we waited. Two of them started to smile and grin, obviously amused because of my sweet, unknowing reaction. Or probably just because I stopped chewing and watched the door of that room with suspicion all over my face. Until one of them leaned closer to me, encouraging me. "Come on, give it a look. I promise you, there's nobody in there. He is just saying goodbye." I looked at her in disbelief, but I stood up. I went over to that room and I opened the door. She was right. There was nobody inside. Just the call button over the empty bed lighting up. My colleague came after me, understanding and soft, saying, "Look, you gotta learn. Sometimes people don't leave even after they've died. Sometimes they stay for a bit until they really leave, whether their body's still here or not. Congratulations, you just learned the reason why we open the window and light a candle whenever someone of our elderly dies." And she's right. By now I've worked in 2 hospitals and 4 elderly homes/nursing homes. All of them honor that tradition. Wherever you witness that someone, a patient or an elderly person, died, you open a window, no matter the weather outside, and you light a candle. The candle is meant to light the soul, spirit, ghost, or whatever you want to call it, of the deceased to show them the way to their beyond. And you open the window so nothing gets trapped inside. Number 2. Over the years, I've learned that I don't need to fear the dead. I've had many other encounters like that. Sometimes I would hear just like a whisper, a patient that died, like them calling my name, or the sounds of their walking. I even heard one of their wheelchairs one time, even though the owner of that wheelchair had just died. No matter what, they never hurt me. It's humans I'm afraid of, the living ones, and I've got my reasons. A few years ago, when I was 23, I worked the night shift. To close in on some important information, at that time I worked in a very small nursing home, which had up to 43 elderly people, and I might be the sole worker there, from 9 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. Yeah, just me for 43 people. It was like my usual night shifts, though. I did my first 2 rounds, made sure that everybody got everything they needed, and was safe and sleeping soundly. I arranged the medication for the next day. Then I would have a bit of free time. Of course, I couldn't go on a full break, but everything was quiet. And on one such night, I sat back into my office chair during free time and spent some time on my phone. Around 2:30 a.m., something happened. One of my elderly, a man with autism and a brain developing error, which kept him on a cognitive level of a 10 to 12-year-old boy, called. He was a sweetheart, and he never usually called in the night. It wasn't part of his routine. So naturally, I got up right away and made my way to his room on the ground level. I entered his room slowly, so I wouldn't scare him if he just pressed the call button while being asleep. But he looked at me. He was awake. Well, more or less. His eyes were small and tired and half asleep and half awake. So I went up next to his bed and asked him softly and calmly, "Hey, is everything all right?" He looked at me. I saw in his eyes and his face that he was bothered by having his routine ruined that night. But he stayed calm and sweet. But then he said something that made my blood freeze in my very veins. "Stefan, there are men in front of my window." I tensed up a bit, but I kept my professional face soft, warm, and understanding. He was afraid, basically an afraid child in the body of an old man. So I took his hand in mine and told him, "It's okay. I bet you just had a nightmare. You can go back to sleep now. I'm here. I'm not going to let anything happen to you." It worked. As soon as I finished talking, he closed his eyes and went back to sleep immediately. But there was this feeling. Why did he see that in his dream? I stood up. I turned toward the window to draw the curtains shut. And I froze. He was right. It wasn't a dream. When I turned, I faced 3 men wearing black hoodies. I could not see their faces, but they looked big and bad. I turned and sprinted. I knew his window was shut, so they couldn't get into the room. He was safe, but I was alone, guarding 43 elderly people all by myself, with 3 unknown men in front of the building, possibly looking for a way inside. I ran as fast as I could. I went into every room, checking every window. After I was certain that there was no way in, I started panicking. Not loud, but I was very afraid, because these men didn't leave after I saw them. They stayed. I did the only thing I could think to do at the time. I grabbed my phone and called the neighbor of the nursing home. Luckily for me, he picked up and did what I asked. He opened his back door loudly, turning on the lights to his house, and slammed it shut again. It worked. The men took off down the street and out of view. I was so relieved. But why didn't I just call the police? Well, I'll tell you this. The next station was about half an hour away. Too far for them to arrive in time. These men would have managed to come inside and do God knows what by then. A few days went by, and when I returned for work, I learned something that gave me the chills all over again. The same night, about 1 hour later than my encounter, someone broke into the nursing home 2 towns over. They cut through the glass of the staircase and entered the building that way. They didn't hurt anyone, luckily, but they went in, stealing the medicine from the elderly, primarily numbing and pain-killing meds. Those are just 2 of many stories and encounters I've had over the years. If you've got any interest for other stories from me, I'd be happy to share them with you. Take care, everyone. The Cleaner's Shift in the Old Wing, from Ziggy Stardust. I'm 36, from Wales. I work nights as a cleaner in a big old hospital. You know the type, one of those massive Victorian buildings that's been extended over the years with newer bits bolted on. My job is to go through the quieter wards and corridors after visiting hours, mopping floors, emptying bins, and making sure everything's tidy for the day staff. Most nights it's just me and a couple of other cleaners, plus the skeleton night staff. After midnight, the place goes properly dead. The lights are dimmed, the heating clanks, and you can hear your own footsteps echoing down the long corridors. It was a bitter cold night in February. Rain lashed against the windows like it was trying to get in. Around 2:30 a.m., I was finishing up in the old East Wing, the part of the hospital they barely used anymore except for storage, and the occasional overflow ward. The lights in that section are always a bit flickery, and it smells damp. Nothing you spray on it ever quite covers whatever's underneath. I needed a break, so I headed for the small staff room tucked away at the far end of the corridor. It's a grim little place with peeling paint and plastic chairs that have seen better days. When I pushed open the door, the lights were already on, which was strange. We're supposed to turn them off to save power. There was an odd smell, too. Not that usual hospital stink, but something sickly sweet. I flicked on the kettle and sat down. That's when I heard scratching, like fingernails dragging across something. I leaned down to look. Nothing. Just shadows and a few old sweet wrappers. The rain was hammering hard outside. Then my walkie-talkie crackled. But no voice, just low static with something underneath. Sort of a gurgling. The lights dimmed suddenly, buzzing like they were about to die. It was then that I saw him sitting in the far corner, half hidden by the coat rack. An older man in his late 50s, wearing the same dark green cleaner's uniform as me. But it looked worn and much more outdated. His skin was pale and waxy, and he was hunched over, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "Hey, you all right?" I said, trying to sound casual. "I didn't see you come in." He didn't move or even blink. The rotting flower smell was getting stronger, filling the room. I stood up slowly. "You new on nights? I haven't seen you around before." Still nothing, until eventually, with a raspy voice, he whispered, "You finished your round yet?" No. I've still got the west corridor to do. You okay there? You don't sound too good." He slowly raised his head. His eyes, I swear to you, were solid black. Like two holes had been drilled into his skull. They didn't even reflect the lights. Best you clock out now, before it realizes you're still walking these halls. My stomach tried to crawl up my own throat. What do you mean, it? A slow, broken smile spread across his face, revealing two long teeth that were more than yellow. The one that does the final sweep after the living are supposed to be gone. Don't stay too long. Suddenly, the walkie-talkie exploded with noise. At the same time, the temperature in the room plummeted. I could see my own breath. I backed to the door, never taking my eyes off of him. As I reached for the handle, the last thing he said to me was, "It's already counted you once tonight." I slammed the door shut and ran down the corridor. The main lights in the east wing suddenly flared back to full brightness. The other cleaners said I looked as if I'd seen a ghost when I found them. I told them in basically a whimper what I saw. One older lad went pale and said there used to be a cleaner here in the 90s who died in the exact same staff room. He'd apparently been found slumped in the chair with his eyes wide open. They say it was a heart attack, but rumors always swirled that he'd seen something he shouldn't have while working the old wing by himself. I forced myself to finish the shift, but I have not stepped foot in that back staff room since. There's only one good way to walk home alone at night, and that's by becoming a premium member at Erie.fm right now. You can keep yourself company with my members-only podcast, Fractured Reality, where I narrate allegedly true accounts of glitches in reality, or explore new worlds like the one in Dogwood, a horror novel audiobook I narrated myself about monsters attacking a small town in Georgia in the 1940s. Free users can get samples, but premium users get the full experience. That's Erie.fm. Membership does not guarantee protection from hungry monsters or terrifying coworkers. Good night. That's all for now, everyone. I've got to clock out, but I'll be back again real soon. By the way, if you do have any ideas of some members-only or spin-off podcasts based off of Tales from the Break Room, I'm all ears. Tweet me on Twitter @DarkPrevails, or send me an email at brendan@eriecast.com. I'd love to hear your ideas. Thank you. Okay, so I wasn't planning on releasing this episode on YouTube, because YouTube doesn't like these kinds of, episodes. But it's been very well received by premium members, and on the podcast side of things. So here it is, and viewer discretion is heavily advised. We need your help to keep Tales from the Break Room and all of EerieCast alive. Go to Erie.fm, that's EERIE.fm, and sign up to be a premium member. As a member, you'll never have to listen to another ad on any EerieCast show. You'll unlock dozens of hours of exclusive audiobooks, including one narrated by me. You'll get exclusive shows and bonus stories you can't hear anywhere else, and more. Only $8 a month, or $70 a year. That's all we need to keep the horror alive. Thank you. That's Erie.fm.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
I need to be clear with you about the following story. This is not your usual scary story. This one is well written, darkly realistic, and very, very devastating. If you have trouble dealing with subject matter regarding harm against kids, then this one might not be for you. It's not graphic at all, my stories never really are, but this one will make you feel dirty, and it will leave you wanting to cry. The story is titled, Everything I Never Knew, from E.J. Walkins. My sister disappeared from a dairy plant in October of 2003, when I was 9 years old. The county still has the case open. Her name was Delilah. She was 8, almost 9 years old, and I was a year older. She had a stuffed otter named Bean that came with her everywhere, and a small white scar on her chin from a porch step she'd fallen off of when she was 4. There was this thing she did where she would go really still right before she cried, like she was holding a breath she knew would set her off if she let it out. I remember the day it happened. My mom had flown to Ohio because her mother had died, and the funeral was Saturday afternoon. Dad was supposed to take care of us for the weekend. He was foreman of the cheese line at the dairy plant and had been there 12 years by then. Most days he left before we were awake. The phone in the kitchen rang at 5:08 that morning. I was already awake by then. Delilah had crawled into my bed sometime in the night with Bean tucked under her arm, and I'd been lying there pretending to sleep, so I wouldn't have to roll over and give her more room. I heard Dad answer in the kitchen, mumbling something into the receiver. Then he walked into the hallway. After a minute, he said, "No, I'll come," twice in the same low voice. He came into my room a few minutes later, in his jeans and a flannel shirt. He stood in the doorway for a long second, looking at the two of us in bed. I had my eyes just barely open, so he couldn't tell I was awake, but I could see him there. When he turned on the lamp, Delilah blinked and made a small sound, pulling Bean closer. "Kids. Hey, Eli, wake up, bud." I opened my eyes and pretended I was just waking up. "Something's going on at work. I've got to go in for an hour, maybe two. Gonna take you guys with me." "Why can't we stay here?" "I tried Mrs. Adler. She's not picking up. And I'm not leaving you two alone here." Delilah sat up and pushed her hair off her face. She told him her stomach hurt. He sat on the edge of the bed and put his hand to her forehead. Whatever he was feeling for, he didn't find it. "You're not warm. You probably need to eat something. Come on." "I don't want to go." "Deli, it's gonna be 1 hour. You can watch cartoons. Nobody's there. I have to check on a tank, and I have to do it now." She looked at me. I shrugged. I was 9, and to me the dairy plant was interesting. We'd only been there once before, and I'd liked it. She held Bean close and got out of the bed, walking down the hall to her room without another word. In the kitchen, Dad poured cereal into 2 bowls and set them on the counter without milk. He was wearing his work boots by then, untied, so the laces ticked on the linoleum when he moved. Delilah came back in a sweatshirt over her pajamas, holding Bean by 1 foot. She climbed onto a stool, ate maybe 4 bites, and pushed the bowl away. "My stomach hurts." "You'll feel better when we get there. I'll bring you crackers," my dad said. He was on the phone, and he wasn't really looking at her when he said it, though. The drive was 26 minutes. The fields outside were silver with frost, and the sky was a deep before-dawn navy. Delilah was in the back seat with Bean on her lap, and her cheek against the window. "Daddy?" "Yeah, honey." "I don't want to go in." "Deli, we talked about this." "My stomach hurts so bad." "You can lay down on the couch in the break room. I'll bring you some ginger ale." She watched the field instead of answering. The plant was on a county road off Route 30, all the way behind a chain-link fence and a sliding gate. Dad had a key for the pedestrian gate and a different one for the side door near the loading dock. The main building was long and low, with the words Hagner Valley Dairy stenciled in faded green above the loading bay. No other cars were in the employee lot. He pulled around to a spot by the side door and killed the engine. The silence that came after made me realize how loud the heater had been. I undid my seatbelt. Delilah stayed put. "Deli?" "I don't want to go in." "Delilah Marie, come on, honey." "He's in there." I remember that moment. I recall thinking I didn't know what she meant at the time, and I didn't ask. Dad sighed and twisted around in his seat to face her. "Who's in there, baby?" "The Shadow Man." He looked at me, and once more I shrugged. I didn't know what to do with that information either. He turned back to her, and his voice softened. "Del, there's nobody in there. I checked the cameras before we left the house. Just me, you, and Eli. I promise." I could tell she was trying not to cry. I told her it was fine. Bean came inside with us. The side door opened into a vestibule with a shoe-cleaning grate and a wall of clipboards. Dad punched a code into the inner door and held it open for us. The hallway beyond had the smell I remembered from a Christmas open house we'd been to when I was 6. It's hard to describe if you've never been to the dairy plant. Kind of like bleach, I guess, with that undertone of milk. He walked us down to the break room and turned on the lights as he went. Those fluorescent tube lights woke up 2 at a time, with soft electric popping sounds. The break room had a folding table, a microwave, a vending machine, and a small TV bolted to a high shelf in the corner. The couch against the wall had clearly been somebody's living room couch before it got donated to work. Dad turned the TV on, flipping through to Cartoon Network, and handed me the remote. Right, so the phone here goes to my office, numbers taped on the wall right there. If you guys need me, you pick it up and dial that. Don't go anywhere. Delilah, are you listening? Yeah. You stay in this room. Don't touch the microwave or open the back door, and don't go anywhere near the production area. I'll be back in an hour, maybe a little more. Okay. Eli, watch your sister, you hear me? I hear you, Dad. He looked at her one more time. She was sitting on the couch with Bean on her lap and her shoes still on. He started to say something else, then he changed his mind, and he kissed the top of her head, telling her he loved her and that he'd be back soon. The sound of his boots faded as he went down the hallway. After that, I could only hear the TV and some refrigerator in the distance. Somewhere deeper in the building, a steady sort of pulse. Delilah scooted closer to me on the couch. She'd pulled Bean up against her chest with both hands tight around him. We sat there. The cartoons played. Eventually, the clock on the wall said it had only been 35 minutes. I'd lost interest in the show somewhere around the second commercial break. Delilah hadn't moved from her spot, and Bean had taken up his position against her sternum. I'm gonna go look around. Eli? I'm just gonna go look. Dad's not gonna care. We came here that one time and he showed us the tanks, remember? But he said don't leave. He said don't go to the production area. The break room is right by the offices. I'll just look at the offices. She didn't say anything after that. I stood up. The TV was loud now that I was paying attention to how loud it was. I told her I'd be 10 minutes. She went still again, meaning she was about to cry, so I sat back down. Okay, I won't go without you. Come with me. I don't wanna. Deli, there's nobody here, Dad said. He said he looked at the cameras. She kept her face turned to the TV. What did you mean by Shadow Man? She looked at me sideways without turning her head. He's here. He stays in the corners. I don't see anything. He doesn't want you to see him. Bean was getting squeezed so tight, his head was at an angle. She's 8 years old, I thought. She's making it up because she's scared and doesn't want to be here. You said you've seen him before? Where? The other time we came. He was up on the walkway. He didn't say anything then. I told Mommy. What did Mom say? She said it was a regular man. That seemed strange. I think now my mother probably said something else, and Delilah translated it through her own head. But at the time, her response sat in my chest and didn't move from there. I told her I wouldn't leave her, and she could come with me, and if she saw him, she could tell me and we'd come right back. She thought about it. Then she got off the couch and put her hand in my hand. Bean came along by his foot. The hallway outside the break room ran in 2 directions. To the left was the way Dad had brought us in. To the right was a long beige corridor with linoleum tile and a strip of black rubber baseboard, lit by the overhead lights that Dad had switched on as he walked us down it. None of the doors had names on them, just laminated sheets and plastic frames with what looked like codes written on them. 2 doors I tried were locked. The third was a supply closet that smelled like bleach. Delilah pulled at my hand and I closed it. The corridor opened on the right into a wider space that I now know was the shipping office. There were 2 desks with old desktop computers and a corkboard layered with paper schedules. Somebody's mug was on one of the desks with a brown ring inside it from old coffee. The mug had a cartoon cow on it, and it said, "Got milk?" We went on. The corridor T intersected at the end. The left end had a heavier door with a small wire glass window and a hand-lettered sign that said, "Production, keep closed." The handle there didn't turn. I went back to the T and turned right. Delilah came with me, but slower now, looking back the way we'd come. I had to tug her hand a little to keep her with me. At the end of that hallway was a stairwell with a yellow railing and a doorway that opened onto a metal catwalk. The catwalk ran out over the production floor, 10 feet up, and from the top of the stairs, you could see the whole room through it. Stainless steel tanks tall enough to take up 2 stories, with pipes connecting them and small valve handles painted red and blue. Below the tanks, the floor was open to drains and washed in pale gray light from the high windows. This was the part I'd liked the first time we'd come. I let go of her hand without thinking and walked out onto the catwalk to look down. The grating made a different sound than the linoleum had under my shoes. Behind me, I heard her say my name.
Eli?
Look, it's huge.
Eli, come back.
I turned. She was at the doorway with both hands on the frame, not stepping out onto the catwalk.
It's safe. There's a railing here. I want to go back.
1 second. I leaned my forehead on the rail and looked straight down. The hum I'd been hearing in the break room was louder out here, low and steady, and I could feel it in the metal under my hands. When I turned back toward her, her face was pointed up and to the right, past me, at the far end of the catwalk, where it disappeared around the side of a tank. Her mouth was open. She was doing the still thing again. I looked where she was looking. The catwalk turned out of sight behind the tank, but I didn't see anything out of the ordinary.
What is it?
She didn't answer me. I walked back to her and took her hand again, and her hand was cold.
Deli, what did you see? He's down there now.
I told her there was nobody, and I pulled her back through the doorway into the stairwell. We came out at the bottom into a corridor I hadn't seen on our first visit. The walls were 2 big stainless tanks set side by side, with a 5-foot gap between them. The gap ran maybe 60 feet and ended at another door. The tank walls were polished bright enough that you could see your own outline in them, blurred and stretched in the curve of the steel. Delilah stopped at the entrance.
I don't want to go that way.
It's just a hallway, I replied.
He's at the end of it.
There's nobody at the end. Look, I'll show you. I walked into the gap. The reflections of me on either side walked with me, 2 pale ghosts at my elbows, faces smeared. I could see Delilah behind me in the curve of the steel, hand still on the doorframe with beam dangling. As I went farther down, she got smaller. The humming sound was stronger here, with a higher note in it under the bass. I got to the door at the end, and I tried the handle. It was locked. I turned around to walk back. The reflections walked with me again, and that was when I saw that one of those reflections was not mine. It was farther down the curve of the left-hand tank, behind my reflection, taller than my reflection, and it was a person shape that was the wrong proportions, narrow at the shoulders and long down the middle, blurred along edges that didn't match the edges on me. I stopped walking. The reflection stopped walking. I blinked hard. When I opened my eyes, the reflection was just my reflection, and Delilah's small reflection at the doorway behind me. Beyond that, just the curve of the tank. I made myself walk back at a normal speed. When I got to her, she was looking at me with the same face she had whenever Mom was about to tell us something serious.
You saw?
I didn't see anything, I told you. There's nobody there.
You saw.
Deli, I didn't. Come on. She put a small hand on my shirt, on my chest, and she said,
Please don't leave me here.
I won't. We walked back to the break room together without going by the shipping office or the stairwell. She climbed onto the couch and pulled her knees up, holding Bean to her face. The TV was still on. Cartoons had moved to a different show. I sat next to her. After what I saw with the reflections, my heart had sped up a bit. The clock on the wall said 7:42 when we sat down. The next time I looked up, 8:11. Del, I'm thirsty.
There's water.
I want a Capri Sun. Dad said there was a vending machine in the office hallway.
I don't want to go.
You can stay. I'll go and come back real quick. I won't go anywhere else.
You said you wouldn't leave me.
I'm not leaving. I'm just going to the vending machine. It's right there. She went quiet. Then she lay down on the couch and turned her face into the back cushion. Bean was tucked between her chin and her chest. I told her I'd bring her one too, but she didn't say anything. The vending machine took dollar bills and quarters. I'd brought 4 quarters from the cup of change on Dad's dresser. It didn't have Capri Sun, but it did have bug juice, so I bought one for me and one for Delilah. I carried them under my arm. Dad's office was at the other end of the hallway. I told myself I would just look inside real quick and see if he was there. I wanted to ask if we could go home already. I didn't say to myself the second part, which was that I wanted to tell him that Delilah was still talking about the Shadow Man. But his office was empty. The light was on, which I thought was weird. His coat was over the back of the chair. There was a clipboard on the desk and a coffee cup next to it, and the coffee cup was empty. The chair was pushed out from the desk like he had just stood up. I called for him quietly, though I wasn't sure if I wanted to be heard for some reason. I didn't get an answer. I walked back down the office hallway toward the break room with the 2 bug juices under my arm. It must have been 10 minutes, maybe 12 at most. I was 9 years old and wasn't wearing a watch at the time. When I got to the break room, the TV was on, but the couch was empty, except for Bean. Bean was still on the couch. Delilah's juice box from breakfast was tipped onto its side on the table. A small amount of apple juice had run out onto the laminate. The straw was still in it. I called her name. Delilah? Nothing. I said it again louder. The bathroom in the corner of the break room was empty. I called into the office hallway, then up the stairwell, where the catwalk doorway echoed her name back at me. Delilah! I then tried the production door, but the handle didn't turn. I went down a hallway I hadn't been down with her, past doors that said Cold Storage 2 or 3, through a heavy plastic flap curtain that closed behind me with a soft slap. The room past the flap was warmer than the rest of the building. There were tanks in there too, but smaller ones, and a workbench with a panel of gauges and a wrench laying on top of an open clipboard. Delilah? Eli? His voice came from a doorway at the back of the room. I went to it. The doorway opened onto a smaller space with a single tank in it, a white tiled wall and a grated drain in the floor. Dad was standing at a utility sink at the far wall, with his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, drying his forearms with a blue paper towel. Water was beaded on the front of his shirt, where his apron had been. The apron was on a hook by the door. Eli, what are you doing back here? You shouldn't be in this room. Delilah's gone. What? She's not in the break room. She's gone. He stopped drying his hands. The paper towel was in a wad in his fist. He looked at me, and I had never seen his face do what it did then. It was like watching a man who had been wearing a costume realize that his costume was on backwards. He dropped the paper towel on the floor. What do you mean she's gone? I went to the vending machine and I came back and she wasn't there. How long ago, Eli? I don't know. Eli, how long? I don't know, Dad. 10 minutes, maybe more. He pushed past me through the flap curtain. I followed him. We searched the plant for an hour. Then we called 911. By the time the first deputy arrived, I had told my dad 3 more times where I'd been, how long I'd been gone, and each time he asked me for a number of minutes, I gave him a different answer, because I was a kid, and I was panicked. He kept his voice level, never really raising it. The deputies cleared the building. Then a county sergeant came in, along with a search and rescue unit with 2 dogs. Somebody got a hold of my mother in Ohio. By the time she made it home, it was after dark, and there were 6 cruisers in the dairy parking lot and a news van out at the gate. The side door near the loading dock had been propped open with a folded square of cardboard. Nobody could say when. Dad said he had brought us through that door, but he had let it close behind us. The deputies took photos of that cardboard. The dogs went out across the field behind the plant, but lost track of anything at the ditch. The county's theory after the first week was that a stranger had abducted her. Someone who had known the plant was empty on Saturdays, and yet knew we would be there. Sometime in the next year, it became an abduction by someone who had been watching the family for a while. And after that, it stopped being any specific theory, and just became the case file with my sister's name on it, and her 2nd grade school photo paper-clipped to the inside. A woman from the FBI asked me to draw the plant on a piece of printer paper. I drew her the catwalk and the corridor between the two tanks, and the room in the back where I'd found my dad. I told her about the shape in the reflection, and she wrote it down. Our living room at that point smelled permanently like casseroles, from all the people we didn't know sending them to us for support. My mother sat at the kitchen table at 3 a.m. with all the lights off. Bean was on the kitchen counter in a clear plastic evidence bag. 3 days after, in the same flannel he had worn that morning, my dad sat in the front yard at sundown until it was fully dark. My mother got the diagnosis when I was 17. She lived another 19 months. By the end, she could not say Delilah's name anymore without coming apart, so she found ways to talk around it, and we all learned to use the same language. My father stopped saying it earlier than that, sometime that first year. I don't remember him saying her name again. I grew up. I went to college in state and moved out for good after my mother's funeral. I got a job in HVAC. I called my dad on Sundays, but we never talked about much. The thing that started it was a planner. 2 summers ago, my dad sold the house I grew up in, moving into a smaller place on the other side of the county. The basement had been a slow accumulation of everything none of us had been able to throw away after my mother died. He needed some help clearing it out, and I was the only one left to help him. He took the garage and I took the basement. He said he couldn't go down there for more than 10 minutes at a time without his back giving out. The basement had been my mother's territory. Her sewing machine and boxes of fabric were down there, along with plastic bins of Christmas ornaments she'd labeled, in her famously round handwriting, on masking tape strips that had yellowed and curled at the edges. I was going through a stack of bins along the south wall when I found the box of her planners. She had used the same brand of black hardcover daily planner from the year she got married until the year she got sick. There were 23 of them, banded together in 5s with rubber bands that broke when I touched them. I sat on the basement floor and went through them one at a time. I couldn't help it. Most of the entries were grocery lists, dentist appointments, or my soccer schedule, or Delilah's piano lessons. I found the 2003 planner near the bottom of the stack. I almost didn't open it. I sat with it on my lap for a while. When I finally did open it, I went straight to October. Then I made myself close it and started January instead. I read from there. I thought if I went straight to the month it happened, I would skip past whatever else was in there, and I didn't want to do that, even though it was a bit tempting. But I found something on a Wednesday in mid-September, 2.5 weeks before that day. The entry was 3 lines. Most of it was about a plumber. But the line in the middle said, "Mr. A called from school today regarding D. Talk to John tonight." The D had been written first, then a name on top of it that had been started and crossed out before I could read it. The exclamation marks were my mother's. She underlined the "tonight" twice. Upstairs, I could hear my dad walking from the kitchen to the garage. He had developed a slow shuffle over the last few years. I knew Mr. A. His name was David Allen. He had been the school counselor at the elementary school I went to from kindergarten through 5th grade, the same school Delilah went to from kindergarten through 2nd. I'd seen him once in 4th grade, after a kid in my class had said something about my sister, and I broke the kid's tooth. Mr. Allen had been a soft-spoken man with a beard. I remembered him saying that what had happened to my family was not my fault, and I'd nodded and said, "Yes, sir," and the meeting ended. I closed the planner, and I put it back in the bin. Then I put that bin in the pile of things to keep. I didn't say anything to my dad about it that day or the next. I drove home that night with the planner in the passenger seat under a folded sweatshirt, and honestly, I wasn't sure why I took it. A couple days later, I called the elementary school. Crazy, but the receptionist actually remembered me, which I had not been counting on. She said Mr. Allen had retired in 2015, but she could get me his email. I said thanks. I wrote him a short message that night and left it open on my laptop for 2 days before finally sending it. I told him I was Delilah's brother, that I was trying to fill in some things from back then, and I was wondering if he would be willing to talk to me. He wrote back the next morning, saying yes. He asked if I would come to his house. He couldn't drive at night anymore. His house was a brick rancher with a wheelchair ramp by the front door. He met me in the doorway. He had me sit at his kitchen table and made coffee. and he waited to ask me any questions until after the coffee was poured. Mr. Allen, I said. David, he corrected me. David, I found something in my mom's planner. It says you called her about Delilah 3 weeks before she went missing. He sat across from me with both hands around his mug. I remember the call, he said. Can you tell me what it was about? I was a counselor for 31 years, and I had 2 cases I've not been able to make peace with. Your sister's was the first. I called your mother because Delilah's teacher had come to me with a concern. Your sister had drawn this picture of her family during a quiet activity. There were things in the picture that were, well, unusual. I'll leave it at that. I called your mother and told her I'd like to set up a meeting with both of your parents. She was very upset on the phone. She asked me not to call your father. She said she would talk to him herself, and she would call me back the next day. Did she ever call you back? She left me a voicemail at the school 3 days later. She said she had spoken to your father, and that picture had been a misunderstanding. She said there was a relative in the family who had had problems with alcohol, and that Delilah had been around it. She thanked me and asked not to follow up. What happened after? Well, I waited a week. I went to Delilah's classroom on a Friday and spent 15 minutes drawing with her at her desk, while the rest of the class did silent reading. I asked her if she was happy at home. She said yes. I asked if anything was scaring her, and she said yes. She said a man was in the corner sometimes. I thought she was describing an imaginary friend. I asked her if it was a real man, and she said no. I thought about it through the weekend, and on Monday morning I picked up the phone to call your mother again. That was the morning I heard about the dairy plant. Eli, I want to say one more thing. I've run that conversation with your mother through my head every week for 21 years. I should have called your father. I should have called CPS. I did neither. I told myself at the time that there was a process and that nobody had told me anything that crossed the threshold for a report. That was true. It was also a way of letting myself off the hook. I'm old enough now to know the difference, and I wanted you to hear me say it. I stayed and talked for another 15 minutes, but nothing really was said. I mean, nothing more important than what was already said. Before I left, he said that he was sorry. I believed him, but I didn't have anything against him. A friend of mine from college works at a regional engineering firm that does plant maintenance contracts for several of the dairies in the state. His father had worked in the plant when my dad did. I decided to call him up on a Thursday, asking him a favor I knew he probably couldn't do. I asked if he could pull the maintenance logs from the plant for the week when that event happened. I told him why. He called me back the next Tuesday. I was expecting him to tell me that he wasn't able to do it. We met up for a beer on Wednesday at a place near his office, and he had a manila folder. This is from a backup the new owners imported when they bought the assets. It's not a chain of custody document. You can't take it to anybody, okay? I know. Thank you, man, thank you. I'm only giving it to you because I think it's the right thing to do. I'm not gonna make you regret it, I swear. He slid the folder across the table. It had 18 pages in it, most of them unremarkable cleaning logs and vendor visits. I went through them at the bar with him sitting across from me. He watched me while I read. The Friday night entry was on page 11, the day before my sister's disappearance. The badge log showed my father had clocked in at 9:47 p.m. and clocked out at 2:13 a.m., about 4.5 hours. The work order line said, concrete patch, basement utility room, facility maintenance, JFK. JFK was my father's initials. Yes, like the president. My friend pointed out 2 problems with that line. The badge log showed only my father's entry for the whole night, with no companion work order, and patches like that were nearly always 2-person jobs. The dairy plant didn't have a basement utility room. He had pulled the floor plan to check, just in case. There was a utility crawl space under the production wing, accessible by a hatch in the washdown area. But it wasn't called a utility room, and it wasn't somewhere you would patch concrete on a Friday night. The Saturday entry was on page 15. The badge log showed my father in at 5:46 a.m. and out at 7:11 p.m. The work order line said facility check, tank 3 cold storage, JFK. The line below it said, no service ticket generated, see facility log. That facility log was page 16. There was no entry for that morning. The page jumped from Friday's evening shift to Sunday morning's incoming run. My friend watched me close the folder. Eli? I know. As I said, you can't take this to anyone, not even the cops, with this paperwork. You understand that? Yeah, I understand. I left after thanking him again, and without touching my beer. That fall, my dad and I went out for dinner a few times. The first time was at his place. He made some spaghetti, which is what he made almost every time we ate at his place. We talked about the Steelers and a leak he had in his bathroom ceiling. He hugged me longer than usual at the door. I could tell he was starting to feel lonely. The second time we went out that fall was at a chain restaurant on the highway. He had a beer with his meal and made a joke about getting old. He told me a story I'd heard before, about a coworker who had dropped a wrench into a tank during a cleaning cycle and had to fish it out on a wire hanger. He laughed at the part where the coworker swore in front of the plant manager. I laughed too, like I always did. Then I asked him about the fall. That fall. I tried to make it sound natural in the conversation. I said I'd been doing some thinking lately, trying to put pieces together for myself. I wanted to ask him a few things if he didn't mind. He set his beer down and looked at me. I couldn't tell what that look even meant. What do you want to know? That Friday night, you were at the plant late. How do you know that? I was looking through Mom's planner. She didn't keep track of when I was at work, Eli. It was something else. It doesn't matter. I just remembered. He tinkered with his spaghetti with his fork. I worked late a lot. You know that. I do know that. Do you have something to ask me, son? Did something happen that week? What do you mean, did something happen that week? I don't know. I'm just asking. Eli, I don't know why we're talking about this. He drank his beer and began to watch the TV over the bar. I changed the subject. He paid for dinner and walked me to my car, hugging me and telling me to drive safe. The third dinner was back at his place 2 weeks later. Spaghetti, of course, and we didn't talk about any of it. He fell asleep in his recliner during a college football game. I sat there and watched him sleep before I went home. There was one more thing I did. Delilah had a friend in second grade named Amber Peltier, the only real friend I remember her having outside our family. After the Saturday, her parents pulled her out of the school. We never saw her again. I found her on Facebook. Her last name was different now, and she was a teacher at an elementary school 2 counties over. Her profile picture was her with 2 kids on her lap on a porch. I sent her a message telling her who I was, asking if she'd be able to talk to me. She wrote back within an hour. She asked if I could come to her house that weekend. I brought some sunflowers. She met me at the door and put them in a vase at the kitchen sink, while her husband took the kids to the park to give us the house. We sat in her living room. There was a candle burning on the coffee table that smelled like apples. You know, I've been wanting to talk to somebody about this for 2 decades. I've never really known who to talk to, so I'm glad you're here, she explained. I'd say it's good to be here, if you know what I mean, but thank you for having me. She told me, I want you to understand that I'm telling you what an 8-year-old told me when I was 8, okay? I don't know what's true versus what she made up to deal with something else. I'm just gonna tell you what she told me. I nodded. We had a sleepover, just the one time. I don't know if you remember that, but we were playing Truth or Dare together in my room. She took every dare instead of a single truth. But you know kids that age, especially the anxious ones. Dares are scary, so it's always truth this and truth that. but not her. So I dared her to tell me a truth, and she started to cry. I thought I'd done something wrong, that I said something I shouldn't have. I remember that night, I replied. She was so scared yet excited to have her first real sleepover. It was a quiet night back at home for me. I recall feeling proud of her for being brave about it. But yeah, that sounds like Deli. She had always been very difficult about opening up. Did she say anything afterward? Amber herself looked like she might cry. She cleared her throat then and said, "I'm so sorry, Eli. I'm telling you this because you need to hear it. So please don't think that I'm trying to start a family feud or hurt you. This is something I never even told the cops. God, I'm so sorry." I swallowed. "It's okay. Please tell me." "Your sister, Delilah, she said that every time she was around her father, her stomach would start to hurt, and that she never knew why. I asked her if he had ever hurt her, and she said that her father was the nicest man but could be scary. He watched her from corners, she said, and sometimes he would follow her to her room when no one else was around. When I asked why he would do that, she cried so hard she couldn't speak. I held her and rocked her and got her to calm down, but I did everything I could to keep the topic away from her home and her father for the rest of the night." My eyes filled with water, and I held both hands cupped in front of my mouth, elbows on my knees. I didn't know I'd been staring at the floor the entire time until I finally blinked, causing some tears to come loose. I wiped my face and stuttered, "Thank you, Amber. I need to go." "I'm so sorry, Eli. I should have told someone. I was so young and scared, and I didn't know what any of it meant at the time." I walked out, and I just drove. Around the start of November, I went out to the plant for the first time in 21 years. I didn't go in. I sat in my car across from the chain-link fence and just looked at that building. The plant had closed back in 2019 when Hagner Valley sold to a national co-op that consolidated the operation into a larger facility 40 miles away. The Hagner Valley dairy stencil had faded to where you couldn't read it anymore, but I knew it was there. The lot had weeds in the cracks of the asphalt and a for sale sign by the gate. I must have sat there for nearly an hour. The light was going. A second-floor window at the south end of the building was a weak yellow square, and I hoped it was just the setting sun catching the glass at an angle. When I drove past it the second time on my way home, the light was gone, and I made myself stop trying to figure out whether it had been anything. I called the listing agent 2 days later. His name was Brian Conroy, and I'd apparently played intramural soccer with him in college. Truth be told, I didn't remember him. I told him I was thinking about getting into commercial real estate as a hobby, and I wanted to walk a vacant industrial property to learn what to look for. He laughed and said the dairy was a perfect place to learn because every system in it was 40 years old. He said he would meet me there one day. But instead I asked if I could just take the keys for an afternoon and bring them back. I could hear him shaking his head over the phone. He said he wasn't supposed to do that. I explained my situation as best I could, that I really wanted to get a feel of the place by myself, that whenever people showed me properties, I never got the right feel, that it felt like I was being rushed or pressured, and I always walked away feeling like I never really saw everything I wanted to see. I played up the "I've got money now" angle, and eventually he relented. He said that he trusted me, having known me back in college, which is miraculous considering, again, I didn't remember him. Beyond his name, I mean. He said he would leave the keys in a lockbox on the gate, and he would text me the code, and he would have to change it the next morning. But he said, don't get hurt, and don't let anyone see me go in. I thanked him profusely. The day before I went, I sat at the kitchen table in my apartment and drank a beer. I looked at the code that Brian had texted me for the lockbox, like I was afraid I would forget it or accidentally delete it. Around 11, I decided to call my dad. He picked up on the second ring.
Hey, son.
Hey, Dad. Just checking in.
You alright? You sound stressed.
Yeah, it's been a long week for me. How's your back?
Same as it's been. You sound tired.
I am tired.
Then get some sleep.
We were quiet for a few seconds, and eventually I said, Dad?
Yeah, son.
Nothing. I love you, Dad.
Love you too, son.
I hung up, and I made myself go to bed. I drove out there a little past noon. The sky was gray, but the forecast did not call for any rain or sun, just gray. The county road was empty. I parked on the shoulder again across from the gate, and I walked over to the drop box. I typed the code, scared it wouldn't work, but it opened on the first try. The 3 keys on a brass ring inside had handwritten labels that read, Side, Office, General. The gate squealed when I pushed it. The chain had been wound through a fence post instead of the gate itself, which meant the gate had been swinging on its hinges for God knows how long. I walked the lot to the side door by the loading dock. The lock turned slowly, and I pushed the door open, standing in the vestibule with the cold air from inside meeting me at the chest. The smell when I went in was nothing like I remembered. That bleachiness was gone, and the milk ghost under it was gone too. What was there instead was the smell of old building that had not been heated in 5 winters at least. It had the stench of cold concrete and dust, a thread of mildew there too, so moisture was probably getting in somewhere. I propped the side door open behind me with a folded square of cardboard. The office hallway looked the same, but the fluorescent tubes were now gone from half the fixtures, and the plastic frames on the doors were empty where the laminated codes had been. The shipping office had been stripped except for the built-in desks. The mug with the cartoon cow was not on the desk anymore, but it was a mug, so I'm not really sure what I was expecting. I went down to the break room, my stomach getting heavy and painful. In the break room, the bracket where the TV had been was still on the wall, but everything else had been hauled out. The folding table had been left behind, leaned against the back wall with its legs folded. I stood in the doorway, but I did not go in. I'd been in this room enough. I went on. The corridor that had T intersected at the production door was the same corridor. The "Production Keep Closed" sign had been pulled down at some point, leaving a ghost in the paint where it had been taped. The vestibule beyond the door was empty. The stainless wall the washdown station had been mounted to had been pulled off, and the bracket holes were ringed with black where the silicone caulk had stained the surrounding metal. I walked through into the production room. I had to stop, because the room was not the room I'd walked into when I was 9. The tanks were gone, all of them. The catwalk was still up there, 10 feet over the floor, but it ran across an empty space now. Where the tanks had stood, there were rings of bolts set into the concrete and a few feet of pipe stub poking up where the cold lines had been cut. The drains were still in the floor, but the hum I'd felt under my hands on the catwalk railing was gone. I stood in the middle of the empty room. I'd been carrying that room around in my head for 2/3 of my life, and somebody had come through 5 years ago, unbolting it, selling it for scrap. The corridor I'd walked down between the 2 tanks, the one with the reflections, was gone. Where it had been, there was just floor. I made myself keep moving. The office key opened my father's old office. The door was no longer locked, but the key worked, which surprised me a little. The office had been emptied like the rest of the building. The desk was still there. After all, it had been built into the wall, a slab of laminate over a frame of 2x4s. The drawers were still in the desk. There were 3 on the right side, stacked. I sat in the empty office for a minute. Then I started with the top drawer. The top drawer was empty. The middle drawer was empty except for a single rubber band and a paperclip. The bottom drawer was the deepest of the 3, and it was empty too. But I'd read enough crime novels and watched enough movies in my life to know what to do with an empty, deep drawer. I pulled it out of the desk frame and turned it over. When I saw it, I couldn't breathe. You have to understand that I did not expect to find anything right there. But there was a manila envelope taped to the underside of the drawer. The tape was yellow and brittle, and it came off in pieces when I pulled the envelope free. I sat on the floor of my father's office with the drawer in my lap and the envelope in my hand. The envelope was unlabeled. It had been folded twice to fit under the drawer. When I unfolded it, I could feel by the weight that whatever was inside was paper, and not very much paper. So I knew it wasn't maintenance logs or photographs. It had to be something else. I opened the envelope, my heart pounding. Inside was a single folded sheet of construction paper. The paper was orange, soft along the creases from being folded for a long time. I unfolded it on the floor in front of me. It was a drawing made clearly by Delilah. I knew her crayon the second I saw it. She had drawn 5 figures in a row across the page in her crayon shorthand. The first was a woman in a triangle dress with yellow hair. Over it she had written, "Mommy," in pink. The second was a boy with a cowlick she had given me on the front of every picture she had ever drawn of me. And over it she had written, "Eli," in green. The third was herself, with brown hair and a purple dress she didn't actually have, but liked drawing. And over it she had written, "Delilah," in purple. The fourth was Bean, with his round otter face and his stick limbs. The fifth was a tall, thin, black shape with no features. She did not give the fifth figure a name. She had drawn arrows between the fifth figure and the figure of herself, and on each of the arrows she had written in tiny purple letters, "No." The arrows pointed both ways. Underneath the row of figures, she had written one line in her purple crayon. "Daddy says shh." I sat with the paper. I struggled to breathe. I stared at that paper for so long, but I had to get up off the floor at some point, so I forced myself up. I folded the paper back into the envelope, and I placed it into my jacket. I put the drawer back in the desk and stood up. I had one more place that I needed to go. The washdown station in the production wing had been pulled out, but the hatch was still in the floor. I didn't notice it the first time I walked past, because the washdown equipment had been mounted over it for years. It was a steel plate set flush in the concrete with a recessed handle, the kind of maintenance hatch I'd seen 100 times on job sites in my own work. I knelt down, and I lifted it. A short steel ladder went down 4 feet into a concrete crawlspace. The ceiling of the crawlspace was the underside of the production floor. The space was maybe 4 feet high, lit only by what came down through the hatch, with the cold, dead air that smelled like wet stone. I had a flashlight on my keychain, so I clicked it on, and I went down. I had to stoop. The crawlspace ran the length of the production wing under the floor I'd walked across as a 9-year-old, and the floor down here was poured concrete, gray and unfinished, with hairline cracks running through it where the slab had cured. The flashlight on my keychain was small enough that I had to sweep it across the floor section by section. Most of the slab was the same gray. About 15 feet from the ladder, near the wall on the south side of the building, there was a section of concrete that was a different gray. It was a rectangle, roughly 4 feet long by 2 feet wide. The edges of it were not perfectly straight, and the surface of it was a little rougher than the rest of the slab around it, because fresh concrete cures a little different from the slab it's been patched into, even when the work is done right. I'd patched concrete on job sites 100 times. I knew what a patch looked like. This patch was decades old. The color had set in long ago. I did not need to test it. I sat on the concrete next to it, and I put my hand flat on it. The concrete was cold. I knew I could sit there and spend an hour trying to pry it open, but I was not ready for what I might see inside. When I could finally move again, I climbed back up the ladder and closed the hatch. I walked out through the empty production room and the empty office hallway. As I approached the break room, my stomach began to feel painful again, and I couldn't bear to look into it when I walked past. I locked the side door, putting the cardboard square back where I found it. I then walked out to the gate. I put the keys in the lockbox and spun the dial. I sat in my car on the shoulder of that county road, and I took my phone out of my jacket pocket. I called my dad.
"Hey, son."
I'd had a plan on the drive over about what I would say. I'd been thinking about it for weeks now, practicing sentences in my apartment, while hoping that everything in my head was wrong. But none of those words were in my mouth now. I sat in the car with the phone to my ear and listened to my father breathing and waiting. I never noticed how patient he could be on the phone.
"Eli, are you there?
Yeah, Dad. I'm here.
Are you okay?"
I don't know, Dad. He waited again, and I tried my best not to cry. I had the phone to my ear, and I was listening to my father's breathing again. But somewhere between my previous words and the start of his next, something changed in his tone, even in that breathing.
Where are you, Eli?
I hung up my phone, and I dialed 3 numbers. That was a tough story to finish. Children should be protected, allowed to enjoy their youth and innocence. The idea that anyone could harm them is already a horrible thought. But to be harmed by your own parent, that is a sin beyond sin. Good night. I'm Darkness Prevails. You've been listening to Tales from the Break Room. You can now do everything on our new site. Listen to the show, submit your own story, and check out my other narrations, all in the same place. Go to erie.fm. That's EERIE.fm. And consider becoming a member for $8 a month or $70 a year. That's the price of one video game a year, and it helps us to keep doing what we're doing now, especially since YouTube has decided to demonetize everyone and their dog. Members also get bonus stories, exclusive members-only shows, audiobooks, and ad-free listening to all EerieCast content. Again, that's Erie.fm. Thank you. Till next time, everyone. I'll be clocking out for now, but I'll be back again real soon. Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. Darkness Prevails here. I was putting this script together and I realized I'm super in the mood for more hunting stories. So if you've gone hunting and you've seen or encountered something messed up or unexplained, send it to me at darkstories.org. For now, enjoy these stories, featuring a daunting series of terrifying events in the Ozarks, a demonic spirit that steals faces, and a wampus cat that kills repeatedly. Before we start, did you know you could be listening to this show and all EerieCast shows without any ads, get access to bonus stories, and unlock horror audiobooks you've never heard before? That's right, and all you gotta do is go to Erie.fm and become a premium member to support what we do. That's Erie.fm, EERIE.fm. Thank you. Now, let's begin. Bigfoot wanted to kill me. From Anonymous. At a double date at a Colton steakhouse, a friend of mine told me about this podcast, so I checked it out. Cool stuff you've got here. That same friend thinks I should send you my story as well, so here goes. I should say at the start that this is the only time I've ever encountered something unexplained. I'm really just an insurance salesman. That's what I did most of my life until my back gave out, and I got disability. But back when I did work, my whole trade was a matter of teaching people that the thing they lay awake fearing at night was not likely to come for them, and I would show them a table of figures to prove it. Donna, my wife, believes most of what gets sent to programs like this one comes from dudes who saw a bear in poor light, and wanted, for once in their lives, to be the one the night had chosen. I held that view myself, up until the spring before last. I'll go ahead and tell my story, and you make of it what you will. I'm not going to beg you to believe me or anything, but I do thank you for listening. The place is up in the Ozarks here in Arkansas. I know when I'm there because my phone gives out a few miles before the road does. Then from there you're on foot. I've hunted those grounds since my father first carried me up there when I was 11 or so. It's national forest on the map, but there's a shelf of it that nobody troubles with, since the road into the bottom of it washed away sometime in the 90s. The county, I guess, never saw fit to mend it. To reach the shelf, you leave the truck at the foot of an old logging cut, and climb a ridge that takes the better part of an hour when you're loaded down with a blind and a cooler and a pack that runs close to 40 pounds. No one's gonna do that for turkey when there's easy turkey down in the river bottoms. A man can just park beside his bird, really. So the shelf here was mine, year after year, and that was perfect. I hunt with a bow. I'm aware that it can be odd to hunt turkey with a bow. The short of how I came to it is that my father shot, and I shot alongside him as a boy. But after he passed, there came a time when the idea of a gun hunting turkey sat wrong with me. It's not an anti-gun or animal rights thing, but more like hunting. If I wasn't hunting with and for my dad, then, my mind told me, I should be hunting for the love of the game. And a bow would be a happy little medium between shooting a gun and strangling a bird with my bare hands. Before I had that thought, I remember taking up a bow in the backyard, doing some target training, giving my hands something to do in the evenings. When one season I thought, maybe I should just carry this into the woods, leave my gun in the truck. So I bought a ground blind to hide the draw, and I've been doing it like this ever since. It's harder work, yeah, but I think that's a lot of the reason why I love it so much. A turkey can catch you blinking at 40 yards, they say, and a bow requires a long pull to bring it to full draw. So you sit folded up inside a little nylon box with the windows let down to slits, and you keep as still as you possibly can. When your moment comes, you have about a second to draw, while the bird has its head behind a trunk or buried in the grass. There's more tactics to this, timing, even skill. I've spent whole weekends on that shelf without sending a single arrow. That's the bargain. But when you do bag a bird, there's so much more satisfaction to it. Anyway, I know that shelf and the land there like the back of my own hand. I know how it should sound at every hour of every night. I'm not the kind of guy that would mistake a barred owl for some sort of strange creature, or to be turned around in the dark by a deer stamping and blowing at me. I've slept up there on my own more nights than I could put a number to, and in the last 2 decades, the worst I've ever encountered was a copperhead that found its way into my boot somehow. That's a different story. Beyond that, the scariest thing in the Ozarks are the spreading ticks. Nowadays, you gotta worry about alpha-gal syndrome. Thanks, Bill Gates. That spring, I drove up on a Thursday. The weekend was supposed to turn wet, and I wanted the dry days for myself, so I went up early. I had a new tent I'd been wanting to try, one of the ones that's supposed to pop up in a couple of minutes, if you know what you're doing, and I figured I'd get the kinks out before it rained. I parked at the logging cut, loaded up, and started up the ridge. It was a good climb that morning. The dogwoods were blooming. About 2/3 of the way up, there's a flat where a creek crosses the trail, and I stopped there to eat a sandwich, listening to nature for a while. Off across the next ridge, I could hear a tom gobbling on the roost. That got me fired up. I made the rest of the climb feeling about as good as I get these days. I set up camp where I always do, back in this little stand of cedars where the ground is flat and the wind can't get at you. Nobody down below can see you up there. I've got an old fire ring there from all my years using the spot, too. I put the tent up, got my bedroll laid out. I hung up a food bag off a limb a good ways from where I'd be sleeping. You've got to do that, unless you want your face munched on by a bear. Then I walked out to look around while I had light. Down the slope a ways, I found fresh scratching in the leaves, where a flock had been working through, and there were droppings, the J-shaped kind that tells you there's a tom. And down at the creek, I found a couple of tracks in the mud, as wide as my hand. That put me in an even better mood. I set my blind in a pocket of brush at the edge of a clearing. I was hoping they would come through there at first light, so I laid out a hen decoy and a jake. Then I walked back to camp. That evening, I cooked supper and turned in early. The thing is, you've got to be in the blind before the birds come off the roost, so that means you're walking out there in pitch dark. The first night, there was nothing. I slept fine and heard the usual. One time I heard coyotes, off toward the river somewhere. They were yipping about something, but not too close, so whatever. There was an owl, too, near the creek. I woke up a couple of times, restless on the hard ground, my first night out, but that's pretty normal. Every time I just laid there listening. Nothing out of the ordinary, and I dropped back off. Friday morning I killed a bird. It was about the best morning of hunting I've had in years. I was in the blind before daylight. The woods woke up around me a piece at a time. A cardinal first, then crows somewhere down the slope, and then the toms cut loose up on the roost. 3 of them at least, and close. My heart was beating fast. I was excited. I gave them a couple of soft tree yelps on my mouth call. Nothing big. Just a hen letting them know she's down here and she's interested. One of them about lost his mind over it. When they pitched down off the limb, I could hear their wings. Heavy, slapping turkey wings. He came into my decoys all strutted up, fan out, dragging his wingtips in the dirt, drumming at the jake. Then he hung up just shy of range and stayed there. I had to sit there and wait him out. My legs were killing me at the time. I had a cramp coming on in my left foot that I couldn't do a thing about. But he finally broke and came on in to take it up with that Jake decoy. When he stopped behind the hen, I lost sight of his head, so I started to draw, and when he cleared, I put the arrow right through him. He ran about 10 yards and dropped. It was a big bird, beard pushing 11 inches, spurs as big as your thumb. I went and got him, carrying him back up to camp, and I was happy enough to whistle a tune. I cleaned the bird at camp. I'm careful about that on account of bears, even though I've never actually laid eyes on one up here. Just sign and old signs at that. The parts I wasn't keeping, the guts and all, I carried way off, down the back side of the shelf to a little gully, a few hundred yards from where I slept. My dad had always drilled it into me, you don't leave that mess near your bed. Then I washed up in the creek, bagged my meat, and hung it in the shade in the cooler bag. I ate a good lunch. I'd earned it after all, and I laid down in the sun a while. It was a fine day. That afternoon, I walked back down to the gully, figuring I'd make sure I hadn't left anything that might bring something right up to the trail to me. The guts were gone, though. Now, that's nothing strange on its own. Crows, coyotes, possums, just about anything will clean that up inside an hour. And it had been a few hours. But it wasn't tore up and dragged around, which is what a critter would have done to it. There's always a mess after, feathers worked loose and a drag mark in the leaves. But there wasn't any of that. It was just gone, like someone had bent down and picked it clean. The leaves around there were barely even disturbed. One dark smear on a flat rock, and that was it. I stood there a moment, told myself I was reading too much into it. Then I walked on back up. That evening, I sat by my little fire and ate. The light came down through the cedars, all gold and then red, and the woods went quiet right at dark, the little hush before things in the night crank up. I tried calling Donna on the off chance I had reception, but there's really never signal up there, so when that didn't work out, I sat with my coffee and watched the fire. I remember being so at peace at the time, having the thought that I should really do this more, that I'd let too much time stack up between these trips. What with my dad gone and the boys grown up, so I made myself promise to do it some more. It was starting to get cold after that, so I put the fire out and drowned it, stirring the ashes and drowned it again. I then crawled into my tent. I couldn't tell you what time it was when I woke up. I never checked. But what woke me up was a sound. The sound was a knocking, one single knock, on wood. It came from down the slope below me somewhere. It sounded like a big limb when it falls and catches another limb, except a falling limb keeps going until it hits the ground. It crashes and tumbles. It doesn't just knock and quit. This was one solid knock, followed by nothing else. I laid there. I wasn't scared just yet, just curious. I was awake and listening, telling myself it was a deer knocking a dead branch loose. Maybe some rotten snag finally let go. I had the bag pulled up to my chin, and I could feel the cold coming up off the ground through the pad. While I was laying there thinking about things, it came again. A knock, coming from a different spot, off to the left now of where the first one was. It was as if whatever had done it before had moved on over in between. And then, a good while after, long enough for me to talk myself back to going to sleep, a third one that came from up above the camp, on the high side, where there's nothing but a cedar thicket and the bald top of the ridge. Somebody would have had to climb up around the whole camp to start making sounds up there, and they had to have done it quietly, since I never heard a step, and I'm a bit of a light sleeper. I lay in that tent with my eyes open in the dark. I started to focus on my breathing, making sure it was doubly quiet, so I could hear better, and also to make sure that I couldn't be heard. But there was nothing else. I didn't hear footsteps or any more knocks after that. Just those three, spread out over what might have been maybe half an hour, each one from its own spot. It had made a sort of circle around me. I told myself it was 3 separate limbs coming down, even though that was kind of silly. But what it really sounded like was something walking the edge of my camp in the dark, rapping on a tree every so often, like a fella going down a hall knocking on doors. When the sun was starting to come up, I got up, and with the sun up, I felt like a fool. I made my coffee and got my gear, then I went and sat in my blind for the morning. That's what I drove 3 hours and climbed an hour to do. I wasn't about to let a couple of weird noises run me off. And you know what? I killed my second bird that morning. It wasn't the pretty hunt the first one was. I wasn't all the way into it, thinking a bit too much about the night before. I kept catching myself looking back over my shoulder out the rear window of the blind, instead of watching the decoys. A couple of times I about missed birds moving out front on account of it. This one came in quiet, no gobbling at all, just kind of showed up at the edge of the clearing already close, which a tom might do sometimes when he's spooky or wore out running hens, and I almost didn't get a shot. But I got it, and I made it good. And that was my second longbeard. 2 of them with a bow on public land. I ought to have been on top of the world. Instead, I felt wore out. There was something sitting in the back of my head I couldn't get to settle. And packing that second bird up to camp, I was already chewing on whether I even wanted to spend another night up there, or just pack out a day early. I cleaned the second bird, carried the guts off the other way this time, away from that gully, so I wouldn't have a reason to go back to it. I hung the meat, washed up. I was sitting there at my fire ring in the middle of the afternoon, broad daylight, sun coming down warm through the cedars, when I saw the arrow. It was one of mine. I knew it right off the bat. It was my fletching. My nocks are orange, so I can find a shaft down in the leaves easily. It was standing straight up out of the ground, at the edge of my camp, a few steps from the tent. The broadhead was driven down in the dirt, so it stood up on its own with the shaft pointing at the sky. Not a mark on it either. Now, I always count my arrows. My dad beat that into me when I was a kid. Count your arrows. I'd carried 12 up that ridge. I'd put 2 into 2 birds and pulled both of them, and they were in my pack, since you don't leave a broadhead laying out in the woods. So, not counting the 2 I had in my pack, I should have 10 in my quiver. I went and counted them again to be sure. I was taken aback. There were only 9 in my quiver, but the one in the ground made 10. I pulled it up out of the dirt and held on to it. I counted all my arrows in their separate spots over and over again to make sure I wasn't going mad. It came out the same every time. One of mine had come out of that quiver, gone into the ground a few steps from my tent, and I had not done it. The only stretch it could have happened was the hour or so I was off dumping guts and down at the creek washing up, with my bow leaned against the cooler, my back turned. That's when it hit me. Cold went all the way down through my belly. I stood there in the middle of the woods, with a chill going down my spine. Something or someone had come into my camp in broad daylight, slid one of my own arrows from my quiver, stood it up in the dirt where I'd be sure to find it, and they somehow never made a sound. I should have packed up right then and right there. A smarter man would have. A smarter man would have walked right off the mountain with 2 birds and a good scare. I stood there with that arrow in my hand, and I came up with excuses not to leave. That I had miscounted, or I had dropped one just right, that it had stood up from the ground. But not one of those holds if you sit with it, even for a moment. There's no other hunter on that shelf. I'd have seen some boot prints, his trash, something to give him away. An arrow doesn't stand itself up in the dirt with no mark on it. And I don't miscount my arrows. Never. My dad made sure of that when I was a boy. But I wanted to stay. Again, I'd driven all the way out here and climbed all that way, and I'd killed 2 good birds already. Some stubborn part of me wouldn't let a few noises and a trick with an arrow run me off my own spot. So I put the arrow back in the quiver, making 10 again, and I told myself I would decide in the morning. The rest of that afternoon, nothing happened. I sat by the fire and I owned my broadheads. I ate early since I figured I'd want to be zipped in before dark. The whole time I kept catching myself turning a little sideways on the log, so I had the tree line in the corner of my eye. I would notice I was doing it, and I'd feel like a fool, even though I was alone, and I'd force myself to face the fire again. But a few minutes after that, I'd be turned around once more. You ever watch a dog stand at the screen door, growling low at the yard, even when there's nothing to see? That was me. The woods just sat there as normal as ever, but at that point in time, I hated it. It clearly wasn't normal out there, and I clearly was not truly alone. Right at dusk, the sounds of the woods faded away. Even the bugs wound down, and I sat there in silence, knowing that something was coming. I've spent enough nights in the timber to know what that usually means. That there is something moving through that even the bugs don't like. Could be an owl coming off its roost or a bobcat. But what you do is you wait a few minutes and you see if it passes on. If it does, you'll hear the bugs crank on up. So I waited. I sat with my supper going cold in my hands, and I waited for the woods to come back to me. But they did not come back. It stayed quiet for so long. It felt like sitting there by the fire in pitch-black darkness otherwise might be a mistake. Like the fire was going to give me away. Like everything could see me, and I could see nothing. So instead of stoking the fire or lighting it back up, I let it burn out. And when it did, I sat there in the dark, letting my eyes come around, eventually. After several minutes, I was able to make out the tree line somewhat, and the pale hump of my tent, but not really much else. But that's when the knock came back. It came from the tree line right at the edge of camp, closer than the night before. I was wide awake and stone sober this time. There was no talking myself out of it, and this time I knew the exact spot it came from. I was looking darn near straight at it, too. After the knocks, there came a sound I would only call huffing. Long, quick draws of air, like a big, exasperated animal. But it was coming from much higher off the ground than a four-legged creature, or even a man for that matter. I didn't move. Another knock came, off to my right. My company had moved, and just like before, it had moved without a sound. A good 20 feet across dry cedar litter that pops if a chipmunk crosses it. And yet, it was moving through it as if it were levitating. I've hunted this region my whole life. I can hear a squirrel change his mind in a tree at 60 yards. This thing crossed open ground so close to me that I should have heard every step, should have heard its arm moving and shifting as it walked. But I didn't. It was like it was in one spot and then another, with no in-between whatsoever. I crouched low, and I got in my tent. I sat down with the bow laid across my lap. A bow is about the most useless thing in the world inside a nylon tent in pitch dark. You can't draw it in there, not enough room, and you're not going to aim it if you did, not in pitch darkness. But I had to have something at that time to make me feel safe, or at least make me feel like I had an action I could take. The knocking outside kept going. It was going around the tent, all the way around, not stopping at just 3, like the last night. There would be a knock to my left, followed by a long wait, then one up behind my head, and a longer wait, then one out past my feet. And every wait in between lasted a different amount of time. Whatever was making those noises was doing it steady and slow. I don't think I've ever met an animal with that kind of patience, sometimes staying dead quiet 10 to 15 minutes each stretch, just long enough to let me think that maybe it had left me alone. But then the knock would come again, keeping my heart and mind on edge. It had all night. This was its domain, whatever it was, and I was an uninvited guest. The worst happened in the middle of the night. There was a knock to my left, then quick, way too quick, an answer off to my right, both very close. These two had no gap in between. I lay there with that bow on my chest now, realizing I was no longer dealing with just one thing out there. There was at least 2 of them. I was outnumbered. And then one of them came up to my tent. I didn't hear it approach. I never even heard it move, but I felt the ground shift. If you've ever laid on the bare dirt while something or someone heavy walks nearby, there's a kind of vibration that comes up through the ground and to your back, and you don't have to hear a single footfall. I felt that. Then another, closer. Something setting its weight down a step at a time, coming towards me. I heard the huffing again, but it was no longer in the tree line. It was right by my head, just outside the tent. The thinnest fabric mankind has ever devised separated me from something that sounded like it could rip me in half. I lay there with my eyes open, trying not to breathe. I could hear it leaning towards me, the tent wall pressed in against my shoulder. Just barely. I wasn't sure yet if it was its face, or a hand, or I don't know what, but even the poles began to creak a hair under it. Then it stopped and stayed like that, leaning on the tent over me, breathing, probably smelling me through the wall. I noticed its smell then too. The worst animal reek you could ever imagine. Like if you piled up roadkill for an hour that you found on the highway and brought it home to microwave for 10 minutes straight. Eventually, it eased its weight back off, slow as it had come, and a good minute later, a knock cracked out from the tree line, once again distant enough. I've never in my life, before or since, come as close to just dying of fright as I did with that wall touching my shoulder. I really think if it had pushed on through, I probably would have died right there. My heart wouldn't take it. After that, I gave up trying to track where they were, and just shook. I prayed too. I'm not usually a praying man, and the words came out a mess, but I said them, and I said them out loud. I thought about Donna. She would probably be sleeping 40 miles away from where I was, and I was reminded I would not be able to call her until I left. Matter of fact, nobody alive knew which mountain I was on, let alone which shelf. I'd kept this spot to myself so well for decades. I was proud of it, until right then. Now I was regretting my secrecy. God, she'd give me till Sunday before she did anything about this, and a day past that before she actually called the authorities. And on top of all that, nobody would know where to start. I lay in the dark with all that stacked up in my mind, and I had to force it out if I wanted any sleep or peace. The knocking continued for most of the night. At some point, the knocking spaced further and further apart, and they finally stopped. But even then I did not feel content or relieved, so I lay there, still shaking, waiting for any noise at all. There would be no sleep. The rest of the night was an exhausted blur, but eventually I heard birds. The woods had come back alive. I finally felt safe enough to move again, and the first thing I did was reach up to my shoulder to where that thing had touched me through the tent wall, like I was going to find some mark or stain. I sat there for a little while longer before I worked up the nerve to put my hand on the zipper. I kept imagining it, still out there, waiting for me to open up. When I finally did it, I did it fast, like ripping off a Band-Aid, and I jumped out, half falling, honestly, with my head swinging left and right to catch any sign of movement. But there was nothing to be seen. My camp was empty, the fire pit was still cold, and the sun beamed through the cedar trees. Whatever those things were, they had walked off and left me for the morning. But I soon realized they'd left messages. The rocks in my fire ring were moved. They hadn't been knocked aside or rooted out by some animal after some grease, like a bear might do. But they had been moved deliberately. For the good part of several years they'd been in a circle, but now they set into a long, curved line, the open side toward my tent. These were larger rocks. I'd have heard them moving around or a man grunting and dragging those. But I had not heard anything, despite being up all night. Yet there they were, in their new, glorious shape. Then I saw my decoys. I'd staked them down at the clearing by the blind, a good 200 yards off and down the slope from here. But both of them were standing in my camp at that very moment. Something had pulled them and carried them up through the dark, and knew to press their stakes into the dirt to make them stand up. It even made them face my tent door, the hen and the Jake, both waiting to greet me as I walked out. I started to look for tracks. If a couple of intruders had decided to invade my campsite, then I would find proof of them being here beyond just them moving things around. The ground around the tent was scuffed up pretty bad. Leaf litter kicked and pressed down in big patches. But the one clear footprint I found was in the soft black dirt at the edge of the fire ring, where I'd splashed my dishwater the evening before. It was definitely a footprint, a bare foot. But my God, it was huge. I've got size 12 boots, but it was longer than my boot by a full hand's length and nearly twice as wide across the ball. 5 toes spread out and dug in deep. The heel had sunk deep into the mud under some real weight. I put my own boot down next to it, just to be sure I wasn't losing my mind. My size 12 looked like a child's beside it. My mouth hung open. A bear track you'd know. A man's track you would certainly know. But this was shaped like a stretched-out man's foot, built like nothing that ought to be walking around the Ozarks on 2 legs, and it had been standing right there at the edge of my fire. What in the hell was it? I didn't stand there long. A knock came down from the high side of the shelf above the camp, and another answered it from off in the trees. Then a third from somewhere down the slope, down toward the trail, the only trail, which was the way I had to walk to get to my truck. They had never left. They'd gone quiet and waited me out, my worst fears realized. Now they were spread around the top of that mountain, talking to each other, and one of them was on my way down. I jammed my tent in the pack half-folded, and I grabbed my 2 birds. I wasn't leaving without my birds. I don't care how scared of a man I was. Then I threw on my pack, and I started down. The trail off that shelf switchbacks through oaks for the first stretch. It was steep with loose rock. I went down it fast, with 40 pounds on my back. I kept my head turning, watching the trees on both sides. But then the knocking started up again, behind me. A knock up from where I'd come from, then one off to my left, lower and closer to my level. They were coming down with me, or maybe after me. But they weren't running. I didn't hear anything crashing through the brush, just knocks and something keeping pace. They moved so silently before, but not now, not when they wanted to be heard. I never saw a single one of them on the way down. About halfway down, that smell returned, and I wanted to vomit. It took me a second to notice the wind. I was upwind, so the smell was coming from ahead of me. There was one below me now. They had me surrounded, front and back. I had to leave the trail. A bad idea most of the time, but I had to do it. Usually you stay on the trail. You don't go busting off into the country. But I wasn't walking down toward that smell, right into that thing's arms or whatever it has. So I cut hard to my right, downhill, straight through the brush toward where I knew the logging cut had to be. I would just have to keep going down. I fell almost immediately. My foot had caught on a root, and I fell hard on a rock, tearing my hand open. I've still got that scar across my palm. But I didn't stop even then. I got up and kept going, dripping with blood down my sleeve. It was then that I heard the screaming for the first time. Holy crap. That screaming was the most terrifying thing I've ever heard in my life. If the knocking and something pushing on the tent was bad, those screams were like something that hell itself concocted. Nothing natural to the forest of any part of the world screamed like that. It came from close behind me and above, and it went up and didn't stop. Even when something that size should have run out of air and stopped, it kept screaming. Every hair on my body stood up. Another scream sounded. One of those things was answering the other call. It came from off to the side, the same kind of scream. This must have been their final warning. I was not wanted here, and I had overstayed my welcome. I ran straight downhill through whatever was in front of me, be it brush or deadfall. I went over a log once, then through a greenbrier patch that opened my arms up, but somehow I didn't even feel it until much later. My pack kept slamming into my back over and over. The birds were swinging about wildly, and the whole time I could hear those things coming. They were crashing through the woods now, no more careful quiet. Multiple huge, heavy things were coming right for me. Things so big and so fast, I knew if they wanted me, if they really wanted me dead, I would have already been dead. They were driving me, like a dog herding sheep. I burst out of the timber so fast I nearly ran past my own truck. I threw the door open and threw the pack in, tossing those 2 birds along with it. I jumped inside and locked the doors, like that was going to do anything against things this big. I grabbed the steering wheel, getting blood all over it from my palm, and I peeled out of there, tossing gravel behind me. I looked side to side, front and back, through each of my mirrors. But as I drove away, I saw nothing come out of those trees. That was the last time I ever visited my shelf. I never went back there. Decades I'd hunted that shelf, and I'd never heard or encountered anything like that. But all it takes is one time, and I got the message. I was not welcome there. That's my story. I'm sorry if the ending is sort of abrupt, but that's the difference between real life and horror fiction. I got away, learned my lesson, and now I'm sharing that story with you. Again, you don't have to believe me. It's your call. And if you're really wondering what my opinion is and what I think it was, what I think they were, you probably already know the answer. I think it was Bigfoot. Probably a family of Bigfoot, or Sasquatches. I'm not sure what the difference is if there is one. But nothing else makes sense. Was there a family of giant people out there trying to warn me away without a single human word? Or was it the famous cryptid? Who knows? But I ain't going back. You couldn't pay me enough to go back. Thanks for listening. This episode is sponsored by ZocDoc. Raise your hand if you've got a doctor's appointment you've been putting off. Mine has been sitting on my list so long I've actively started pretending it's not there. My usual move when something feels off is 30 seconds of internet searching, 45 seconds of panic, then a final convincing speech to myself that it's probably fine. That strategy has worked 0 times. This year I'll be using ZocDoc instead. ZocDoc is a free app and website that helps you find and book high-quality in-network doctors so you can find someone you love. With more than 150,000 providers across all 50 states and over 200 specialties, you can search by specialty or symptom, browse thousands of verified patient reviews, and book a real-time appointment that often happens within 24 to 72 hours. If you've been doing the search and spiral thing like I have, ZocDoc is exactly what I'd use. Stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/unexplained to find and instantly book a doctor you love today. That's ZocDoc.com/unexplained. 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 Thanks, ZocDoc, for sponsoring this message. The Face Wearer, from Scary Gab J. So, my entire life I've had paranormal experiences. I come from a long line of witches, some of whom were or are very powerful, and some who do lots of baneful magic. I could sit here all day and send you ghost stories, but I'll settle for this one today. When I was around 7 or 8 years old, I lived in a super creepy 2-bedroom house with my mom, dad, and siblings. We found many weird things outside, including human bones at one point. When my sister and I found these bones, my dad said to put them back exactly where we found them, and to not touch them again. I always had a hard time sleeping. I would be up all night some nights. One night, all my siblings were sleeping, mostly on the top bunk, and I was on the bottom bunk with just one of my sisters. I was up, as usual, alone. I think it was around 2 or 3 a.m. I was just laying in bed. Out of nowhere, my dad walks into the doorway of my room and motions his hand for me to come with him. He didn't utter a word, literally just motioned his hand at me. So I got up and went with him to the couch. In my living room, we had a couch and a love seat. My dad sat on the couch and motioned with his hand, patting the couch for me to sit next to him. Again, he wasn't saying a word. We sat there and I watched TV with him in complete silence. The entire time I was watching the TV, my dad was not watching it. Instead, he was staring straight at me. I noticed his eyes did not reflect any light. They were black, pitch black. I did not see any white in his eyes at all the entire time, and I had a very weird, uneasy feeling, like something was very wrong with him. I tried my hardest not to look at him the whole time, but I could see him from the corner of my eye. At one point, he even put his hand on my knee, something he did not usually do. I stayed there next to him for about half an hour, watching the TV. Eventually, I said I wanted to sit on the love seat. He didn't say a word. He just nodded. Then I moved. I ended up sitting out there, feeling creeped out, like something just wasn't right, for another 10 minutes. Finally, I told him that I wanted to go back to bed. My dad again didn't say a word. He sat there silently, motioning for me to come and give him a hug, which I did. He even kissed me on the cheek while I hugged him. He felt very, very cold, not at all a normal human temperature. After that, I went into the hallway. In that hallway, my room and my parents' room were right across from each other. So instead of going to my room, I went the opposite way to my parents' room, just to see if my dad was sleeping. He was. Him and my mother were both in their bed, sleeping. I stared at both of them for a minute before turning away. But standing before me now, blocking the doorway of my parents' room, was the face-wearing entity. It was leaning forward, staring straight into my eyes, only 2 to 3 inches from my face. Its eyes were huge and black, and literally for about 30 seconds, it stood just like that, leaning forward, staring at me, not saying anything, not even blinking. I was so scared, I couldn't bring myself to move or speak. After the most uncomfortable time, it straightened up, showing that it was taller than my dad. My dad is about 6 feet tall, but the way it stood, it was probably closer to 7 feet. It then walked away, heading towards the kitchen, which you need to walk through the living room to get to. I hurried back to my room and forced myself to go to sleep. I didn't have any more experiences like that until years later. I was about 10 years old, and we had moved to a bigger apartment. My grandmother was over babysitting me one day. Inside my parents' bedroom was this huge bathroom. They also had a computer in their room. So I walked out of my parents' bathroom and saw my grandmother using the computer. Like literally the screen was on, and I could hear her typing away on the keyboard. So, not thinking twice about it, I was about to walk out. When I got to the doorway, I stopped in my tracks, because I could see right in front of me my grandmother was sleeping on the couch. Once I saw her there, of course I looked over, and there that thing was again. The same thing that I'd seen pretending to be my dad was now pretending to be my grandmother. It was standing next to me, leaning forward once more, staring straight into my eyes. This lasted for about 15 seconds. Again, it had these huge, pure black eyes. It then turned away, sitting back into the computer chair. It went right back onto the computer, typing at the keyboard. I walked out of the room, and I stayed out for maybe 2 minutes, staying next to my sleeping grandmother. But I did go back into the room, only to find that no one was there. I've never seen this thing again, and to this day I don't know why it chose to show itself to me, or what its motivation was. But it's something that has stuck with me very vividly ever since. Cryptid Connection from Appalachian Princess. The stories I'm about to tell you happened in 2 different decades. One happened in the early 60s to my great-grandpa on my mother's side, who lived in the valley. And the other happened in the late 80s to my grandpa on my dad's side, who lived on the mountain. 2 different stories, but I think they're about the same creature. I'm not sure of the exact years they happened, so I'll do the best I can. I'll tell you what happened and then my opinion. Please let me know what you think. When my great-grandpa built his house in the mid to late 50s, he made what he thought was a good decision to make sure the house was slightly higher up, in the case he had to work on water pipes or some such. Then he wouldn't have to belly crawl. Instead, he could simply crawl on all 4s and sit up to work on anything under the house. The door that led to underneath the house was right under his room at the back of the house. You could look out his window and see the backyard and right up the hill behind the house. At the time, there were trees on the hill back there, and you couldn't see much through them. Of course, those trees are gone now. Back then, there were no streetlights or anything up there, so it was super dark. In the late 60s, there were some incidents where some people's pets were attacked or even killed. When I asked one lady about it, her eyes got really big, and she simply said, "I really don't want to talk about it, honey. We try not to think about that thing." During this time, my grandpa had a little dog he would go squirrel hunting with. He would bring the dog outside and let him run up in the woods, while my grandpa would sit in the swing in the backyard, listening to that dog bark at them. That dog was not an inside dog, and he wasn't an outside dog either. So if Papa hollered for the dog to come back inside, and he didn't come back at night, Papa would just head on to bed, and the dog would come sometime in the morning. It would go in and eat, and head right back out. So according to my grandpa, he had been working on putting lime under the house for mold, and he noticed there was a leak under there from the bathroom. So he had to fix that and left that door open so he could check it later, making sure it wasn't still dripping. When it got dark, Papa hollered for his dog, but the dog did not come. So Papa just went on to bed. At around 2 or 3 a.m., there was a loud commotion that woke Papa right up, pretty much jolting him awake and startling him. He said what he heard next broke his heart. The commotion was crazy, he said. He heard that little old dog not yelping, but screaming. He said he'd never heard a dog scream like that. He grabbed his pistol and a flashlight and ran out the back of the house to that door that led under the house. By the time he got to the door, it had already gone quiet, and he knew that little dog was dead. He said he couldn't hear or see anything at first. Then he knew there was something wrong. There was something else under the house, and it was growling at him. He could smell it too. He said it was one of the worst smells he'd ever smelled before. The way he put it to me was like rotting meat and wet dog. He said he braved it and got down and started crawling under the house, shining the flashlight to see what he could see. He said he could hear it breathing and realized it was very close. What happened next happened in about 10 seconds. He moved the flashlight to his left, and all he saw was black, fur, and big green eye shine run past him. Papa screamed and then retched. The smell was so concentrated and awful, he couldn't help it. Papa back then was part of the fire department. He had seen and smelled some rough stuff, to say the least. He said he sat there for a few minutes and collected himself, and he got to thinking. He couldn't leave that little dog under there. So he went and got what he said was left of it. He didn't want my granny to see that. He wanted to bury the dog, and he would tell her what happened when he went back in. The whole time he was burying the poor dog, he knew that thing was watching him. After all, he could still smell it. When he went inside, my granny was standing there, and she was scared to death. He told her what happened, and finally started to cry for his dog. The next morning when he went outside, his neighbor had come out. Papa went over and told him what had happened. Apparently he had not been the only one that night who had a pet attacked or killed. According to the neighbor, earlier in the night, a lady on the road across from my papa almost lost her little dog to something. She had been out on the porch, smoking, and she had her dog on a leash. She said suddenly she smelled this terrible smell and began to hear growling. The little dog actually began to shake and tremble and peed itself while running to the porch. She said they went into the house, and she heard all this commotion on her front porch, something scratching and growling. Papa said there were actually deep scratches on her door when he went to check. This went on for a few nights in a row, but just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. There was quite a bit of speculation as to what it was. Could be a mountain lion, a coyote. Someone even said it might have been a small bear, but my papa doesn't believe that. He said it was bigger than a coyote, and he had never seen a mountain lion or a bear ever look or smell like that. He never knew what it was, never found out, but he never wanted to encounter it again. He has since passed away, but he firmly believed it was no coyote, no mountain lion, no bear. Skip to the late 80s. This happened to my grandpa, my dad's dad. The man was an avid raccoon hunter, and he had some of the best coonhounds around. Grand Night Champions, UKC Champions, the list goes on. We're talking some expensive and high money-making dogs in the coon hunting world. If you know, you know. For the most part, these dogs were some fearless dogs. My papa and his best buddy would take these dogs out almost every night so they could tree some raccoons. In the off-season, you can't shoot them out to the dogs, so you let them tree them and call them off to go to the next one or to go home. This particular night, he and his buddy took 4 dogs, 2 of my papa's and 2 of his buddies. These dogs were 4 of the best, some of the smartest dogs. So they get to where they're hunting and turn the dogs out. And of course, the dogs do what they do. They sniff, pee, run in a circle, and do the same thing for 10 minutes, till they are all stretched out and ready to go. The dogs were winding something. Then one of the males lets out this long bellow and takes off. The other 3 follow him. So my papa and his buddy are on the back of the truck, listening. To get a better understanding, some raccoon hunters don't walk with their dog. They hang back and they wait for that long bellow, which lets the owner know that they are on the trail of a raccoon. A good hunter will wait for that one specific bellow and know the dog or dogs have a raccoon treed and to go to them. In the off-season, they will either reward the dog with something or let them tree for a while. In season, well, we kind of know what happens. So my papa and his buddy are listening for the dogs to tree and waiting. Well, it's silent for a good while. Then, from what papa said, all hell broke loose. All the dogs started raising Cain all at once, not like they had a coon treed, but like they were fighting something off. So papa and his buddy grabbed their rifles and start to take off to where they heard the dogs, thinking maybe they found a raccoon on the ground and got to fighting over it. They got about 50 yards in, and all this commotion turned into dogs yelping, sounding like they were hurt. Then, suddenly, everything got quiet. My papa and his buddy got still and started to listen again. They smelled it before they saw anything. Papa said it was the most horrible scent ever. It smelled of dead, wet animal. All of a sudden, they heard a noise. It was one of his buddy's females. She was limping and bleeding bad, her tail tucked between her legs. His buddy grabbed up the dog, and they both headed back towards the truck. However, whatever this thing was, came towards where the truck was. When Papa started the truck and turned the lights on, he got a glimpse of this thing. It was black, hairy, and had big green eyes. Whatever the thing was, it was huge, and the smell coming off of it was absolutely horrid. He said he backed out and tore up the dirt road getting out of there. Unfortunately, the female dog didn't make it. Papa said she had too many wounds, and they were deep. He was shaky, but he showered and managed to get some sleep. He told my granny about what happened the next morning, and she too asked if it had been a bear or a mountain lion. Papa told her there was no way in hell it was either of those things. As big as all 4 of those dogs were, they could have taken a mountain lion no problem. His buddy came up about an hour after he told Granny about it. He wanted to go try and find the other dogs, to see if by chance they made it out alive. Papa said he wished they hadn't gone, because the scene that was left looked like an 80s horror film. As for what killed them, they never could find tracks or anything. As an avid raccoon hunter, well, that was over. He got rid of everything but the dogs. He bred them and sold puppies to make his living after that. Scary part is, my papa and his buddy were hunting like a mile from our house, so this creature was very close. Now I just want to clarify that the trip from the valley where my great papa lived and my papa's on the mountain, as the crow flies, is about a 20-minute trip. To drive it, it would take about 35 or 40 minutes. In other words, you could go across the road to the bluff on the mountain, which would take a 10-minute walk. Then you could look off with binoculars and easily see my great-grandpa's house in the valley. I'm not sure, but I think what was attacking those pets, and what my grandpa saw and smelled, might have been a wampus cat. The glowing eyes, the horrible smell, the quickness and the strength, it all leads me to believe it was a wampus cat. But I didn't see it, so I can't be too sure. But let me know what you think it may have been. Come for the Bigfoot story, stay for the Wampus Cat Massacre, am I right? Sheesh, what a creepy set of stories. Seems like a pleasant night to stay far away from the woods, huh? Good night. Thank you so much for listening to Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. You can find me on X at Dark Prevails. And you can find my other show, where I narrate scary work-related stories. Search for Tales from the Break Room on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, your favorite podcasting app, or the brand new Eerie.fm, where you can listen to all EerieCast shows. You can even go there and sign up for premium to support us, unlock bonus episodes and audiobooks only for members. You'll also get no ads whatsoever on all EerieCast content. No Spotify nonsense, no Apple nonsense or whatever. Just good old-fashioned horror without any interruptions. But again, that's members only at Eerie.fm. Thank you. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Oh, I've got quite the fun story for you today. It builds into one of the most tense and creepy ending sequences I've ever heard in a story on this show. This story is titled, I Met Her in the Rain, and it was sent to me by an anonymous sender. It's about a man who takes care of vacant homes along the coast, but a long rain brings something with it that seeps into his heart and leaves him changed forever. I'm Darkness Prevails, and this is Tales from the Break Room. Get more stories like this without ads and more over at Eerie.fm by becoming a premium member. Help us keep our horror alive. Thank you. I took that job because my dad said I would never keep it. That isn't the whole reason, but it's most of it. I was 24 years old. I'd started a 2-year HVAC program at Clark College when I was 20, and I quit 8 weeks in. There was this warehouse job before that, and a tire shop job before that, and my dad kept a running total in his head. He's a diesel mechanic in Vancouver, Washington, 31 years at the same shop. He's never once in his life called in sick. At least, that's what he says. When I told him I was moving out to the coast in May to clean vacation rentals, he said, "Okay, good." Then he said he'd see me in August. He wasn't being mean about it. He was teasing. So I stayed past August. Then I stayed past September. By the next couple months, the summer crew broke up, and Sherry Voss, who owned the outfit I'd been cleaning for, asked if I wanted to move over to off-season maintenance, which was $19 an hour plus mileage instead of $17 and no mileage. I said yes before she finished the sentence. Kilchis Bay is a town of about 600 people on the North Oregon coast. There's a market and a gas station that closes at 7, and a church and a school, as well as a bar I went to twice. I rented a room over a garage from a woman named Gail for $450 a month. The room had its own outside stairs and a hot plate and a bathroom with a shower, but I did have to stand in the shower sideways to fit properly. The job was houses. 9 miles north of the town, there's a development called Sea Ridge that somebody put up in 2006 or 2007. 22 houses on 4 streets, all built by the same outfit off of 3 floor plans. Scattered around the outside of that were the older places, on Cormorant Lane and Up Bell Road, houses from the 60s and 70s that people had bought and updated and rented out. Sherry managed 31 of them on a weekly check, and another 12 on a quarterly, and every single one of them sat empty from the second week of October to spring break, except for the odd Thanksgiving or a New Year's rental. What I did was keep them from rotting, basically. That's really what it was. A house on the Oregon coast that nobody lives in for 5 months will try to eat itself. So I'd let myself in with the lockbox code, and I'd run every faucet for about 30 seconds, because if the water sitting in the P-traps under the sinks evaporates, then sewer gas comes up through the drain, and it can make the whole house smell like a septic tank by March. I'd flush every toilet for the same reason. I'd check the thermostat was holding at 55. I'd go down on my hands and knees at the crawlspace hatch with a flashlight and look for standing water, and I'd look at the ceilings for stains, as well as empty the dehumidifiers. The dehumidifiers really were the whole job. Sherry had bought a pile of the same model, a white one with a plastic tank in the front that pulls out like a drawer. In a normal winter, you'd empty it every few days. Then I'd fill out a sheet on the clipboard, 1 line per house, and read the whole thing off to Sherry on the phone at the end of the day, so she would have it for her records. As a bonus, Sherry did everything on paper because she was 61 and did not know how to use apps. Manny Ocampo had the older houses, and I had Sea Ridge. Manny was 50-something and quiet. He had a granddaughter he talked about constantly whenever we were near each other. But the guy up and quit on the 19th of December because his daughter in Salem needed some help, and Sherry, I guess, never decided to replace him. So from December on, I had all of it. 31 houses. The 12 quarterly ones just sat in the back of the binder and I never got to them. And Sherry said, "Don't worry about it. Get to them when you get to them." If it had been a normal job, I'd have been home every night. But then the rain really started in January. Rain on the coast in winter isn't news. It can rain from Halloween to damn near Easter, and everybody's used to it. Nobody really brings it up, not in a serious way. What made this one different, though, was that it literally didn't stop. It never let up overnight, and it never gave you an hour in the afternoon to get a load of stuff out to the truck, not without it and your collar getting soaked. It came in one weekend, and it was still coming down 19 days later when I left. By about 3 or 4 days in, the marsh had come up over Highway 101 at the low spot, about 2 miles north of town. At high tide, there was 8 or 10 inches of brown water across both lanes, with cattails standing up in it, so the local government had to put out sawhorses, and the only other route from Kilchis Bay to Sea Ridge was the Ridge Road, which is gravel and climbs up over the ridge in a lot of tight, blind turns. It takes 50 minutes, if you don't meet a log truck. At the same time, my workload roughly tripled. Every crawl space had water in it. Every dehumidifier tank was full, and when they're full, they shut themselves off and do nothing. So if I let a house go too long, I'd come back to a shut-off machine, and mold blooming on the north wall of the master bedroom. Sherry was calling me twice a day by then. The owners were calling her from Phoenix and Boise, wanting to know if their houses were okay. And she'd tell them, "Danny's out there right now." And Danny was out there. So on that day when the marsh flooded, I had an idea, one that kept me from having to drive back. The idea came to me when I was completely exhausted. I finished down at Sea Ridge Drive around 9 at night, and I sat in my truck in the driveway, visualizing that 50-minute drive up gravel in the dark with all that rain. So I just walked back inside the house I'd been working on. I slept on top of the comforter with my jacket over me and my boots by the door. In the morning, I pulled the comforter straight, wiped down the counter, took my trash out with me in the truck. Nobody was the wiser. Then I did it the next night at a different house, and the night after that. Now, don't get the wrong idea. This was a firing level offense. Sherry trusted me with 43 sets of lockbox codes. If an owner had driven up unannounced and found some kid asleep in their bed, that's the company and her insurance and her whole business on the line. I told myself the road was closed, which was mostly true at high tide, and I told myself I was saving the owner's money and mileage, which was also true. But I never told Sherry, or even my dad, that I was doing that. By then, my dad and I were on a schedule of one phone call every couple weeks, which was usually about his health or his truck. So nobody on Earth knew what house I was in at any given moment. Including me, half the time, because those Sea Ridge houses are the same house. The flooring is the same gray plank in every one of them, and the cabinets are the same white, and there's always this framed photo of a sand dollar in the hallway that is, I'm not exaggerating, the same photo, 22 times, across different houses. The 3 floor plans are the same plan with the stairs on the left or the right, or the garage might be flipped. I'd wake up at 2 in the morning and have to think for a second about which side of the bed the bathroom was on. I started to leave one lamp on, the floor lamp in the front room, whichever house I was in. Coming back at night off the Ridge Road, there's a long, slow bend where you can see the whole development spread out below you, and every window would be black except one. That would be the one I was staying in. It was a nice thing to have. Something about it made the whole arrangement feel less like trespassing and more like coming home. This brings me to the story you've probably been waiting for. So the first thing I couldn't explain happened at the end of the week, 6 days into that rain, on Bell Road. Bell Road was Manny's designation formerly. It's an older house, cedar shakes gone black, built into the hill so the downstairs is half underground. That house was my worst one for water. The dehumidifier down there filled its tank in about 14 hours, and I'd go back there every day. I came in around 3 in the afternoon, soaked through, and I went straight down to the lower level. The machine was running with its green light on and the fan going. When I pulled the tank out, it was empty and dry. For a second, I just stood there. A dry tank on a running machine means somebody had to have emptied it, recently enough that no condensate had come off the coil yet. And in that house on that day, that meant within about half an hour. I put the tank back and went upstairs, checking the front door. It was locked. Same with the sliding door and with the garage side door. Nothing appeared to be out of place. I didn't see any wet footprints, though I hadn't left any either, because I'd taken my boots off at the door, which was a habit of mine. The only thing I found was in the back bedroom. That bed was made up with a quilt, and there was a dent in it. A body-length dent, hip deep, right down in the middle, like when someone lies down on top of a made bed long enough to leave an impression. And when I put my hand on it, the quilt was dry and warm. The rest of that house was so damp the paperbacks on the shelf had gone wavy. I decided Manny had a key. That's what I settled on. Manny lived in Salem now, but maybe he had come back for some reason or another. Or maybe there was a neighbor with a key, or maybe Sherry had somebody else out there and had not told me. I actually texted her that night, asking if anyone else was going into Bell Road. She wrote back,
"No, just you. Why?"
And I wrote back,
No reason. Thought I saw tire tracks."
That would be the first lie I told about it. And there would be more. I saw the woman the first time the next evening, from the deck of one of these Sea Ridge houses. This particular house sits at the end of the row with nothing between it and the beach, except a strip of shore pine and a public access stair. I'd gone out on the deck to get a signal, because the cell service out there was garbage in the rain, and I was standing under the eave with my phone up. There was a woman down on the sand. She was about 200 yards off, down toward the creek mouth, standing still with the surf coming in behind her. She wore a green rain jacket, and her hair was dark. Even that far away, I could tell she was young, and I remember thinking she was probably pretty, which is a stupid thing to be able to tell at 200 yards. But maybe it was something about the way she stood. I thought, who in God's name is out walking in this? I went back in and did the downstairs. I then came back out about half an hour later. She was still there, in the same spot, standing in the rain facing the water. Her hands were down at her sides. I wasn't scared of her, no reason to be. I was curious, though. I hadn't had a conversation with someone under 50 since Manny left. I thought about going down the access stair, saying something, but I chickened out. It's a mile of empty beach, and a strange guy walking up to you in the rain is not a nice thing to have happen. When I came back out a third time, the woman was gone. 2 nights after that, I saw 2 lamps. I'd gone into town for some pizza. It's a bigger deal than it sounds because the Ridge Road took 50 minutes each way and the pizza place shut at 8. So it was around 9, and I'm coming down the bend with my pizza, where the whole development opens up below you. And at my designated house, the lamp was on where I'd left it. But there's another light on 2 streets over. I sat in my truck at the bottom of the drive with the pizza on the passenger seat, and I looked over at it. It was the upstairs window on the north side. It was one of the houses I'd been at that same morning. I'm not a brave guy, but I was on the hook for these houses. My whole head at the moment was full of very specific and very boring fears. Did I leave a light on? If I'd left a light on, I might have left other things, and Sherry pulls the electric bills. So I drove over and I let myself in. I stood in the entry and yelled hello a couple of times, and I felt stupid doing it. The house was cold, 55 on the dot, and it smelled like those cheap plug-in air fresheners that Sherry buys in bulk. I went up the stairs, and the light was the bedside lamp in the north bedroom, on, with the shade slightly crooked. There was nothing there. The bed was made and the closet was empty except for some hangers. Nobody under it, because I looked. I will say, though, there's a certain feeling you get when you're 24 years old, on your belly, looking under a bed, with a flashlight in your teeth. It harkens back to being a child and asking Dad to look under your bed because the boogeyman is there. I turned off the lamp. I left and ate my pizza, which was now borderline cold. Now, the thing that stuck with me, though, is that I had done my walkthrough of that house at about 10 that morning. I remembered clearly being in that bedroom, because in that floor plan, the north bedroom is where the ceiling stain was that I'd been tracking for Sherry every week, penciling a line at the edge of it and writing the date to see if it was growing. And I remembered turning that lamp off this morning, especially because the switch is one of those little wheels on the cord. I remembered my hands being wet, so I had to try twice. So, who turned it back on? On day 10 of the onslaught of rain, I finished at the house at the end of the beach access. I went out to my truck and there was a girl sitting on the bottom step of the public stair. Her hood was down in the rain, and she was eating an apple of all things. She looked up at me and said, "You're the guy that goes in all these houses." Yep, you got me. I'm the guy," she replied. "I thought you were robbing these places at first. If that was the case, you'd be horrible at it, because you take like an hour." Her name was Nell. She was 26, which she told me before I asked. "Do you live around here?" I said, because nobody really lives around here. "My aunt's place, over on Cormorant." She tipped her head in that direction. "She goes down to Arizona in October and comes back in April. Somebody's got to run the water and get the mail off the porch." "That's basically my job." "Yeah, except I do one house and you do 40, and obviously I don't get paid." She took a bite. "Green Valley, that's where she is. She says there's about 900 Oregon people down there and all they do is play cards." I asked what she did when she wasn't running the water at her aunt's. She said she was still figuring that out. Then she stopped. There was an awkward silence for a couple of seconds, so I felt pressured to say something. I explained to her that I'd started HVAC school at Clark and lasted 8 weeks, and that my dad kept a list of the jobs I had, temporarily. She nodded the whole time I was talking. "I was a dental assistant," she said eventually. "Spokane, for 4 years. I just walked out during one lunch break and never went back." "Oh, so you quit? Quit. She turned the apple around, looking for a good side. "Everybody I know who finished a program hates their life." I laughed a bit harder than the joke was worth. I don't think I'd laughed at all since October. Nell had a chipped front tooth, upper left, a little corner off of it. She caught me looking and tapped it with a fingernail. "Swing set," she said. "I was 9 years old, and I went face first into the chain." We sat at the bottom of the stairs for nearly an hour, with the rain coming down on both of us, neither one of us doing much about it. When I finally said I had 4 more houses, she stood up and brushed off the back of her jeans. "Hey, tomorrow you should tell me which one you'll be at," she said, "so I don't have to sit on a step like a stray dog." I gave her the address that night. 3 days later, I gave her the code. I was in bad shape by then, and I had never noticed it. I'd been alone since October. There was Sherry on the phone about crawl spaces and whatnot. There was a guy named Roy at the market who says about 9 words a day, and 4 of them are, "You want a bag?" A woman named Gail I saw once a month when I paid rent. At this point, I was going a little crazy, starting to talk to myself out loud in the houses as I worked. It wasn't crazy talk, honestly. It was just, okay, upstairs, to nobody, just to have a voice in the room. But then I had a girl show up out of the rain. A girl who thought my job was funny, and that my life was interesting. And I fell for her about as fast as it is possible for a person to fall for someone. Just 4 days at the most is how long it took. On day 4, I was already thinking about spring, where she'd go then, and whether she would stay for me. Those next few days were the best days I'd had out there. She'd come find me at whatever house I'd told her about. Sometimes she'd already be inside when I came back from the truck, sitting sideways in an armchair with her legs over the arm, reading a paperback book she'd taken off a shelf. She read other people's vacation paperbacks the whole time I knew her, but I don't think she finished a single one. She'd get like 60 pages in one and leave it face down and start another one at the next house. She helped me sometimes too. Not with the crawl spaces, she wasn't going down there. But she'd go around and run the faucets while I did the dehumidifier thing, and she was fast at it. One night I came upstairs and she'd already flushed all 3 toilets and set the thermostat back. Then she said, "You're welcome. I've cut 11 minutes off your life." We drove into town twice on the Ridge Road. The second time we got sandwiches at the market, those turkey ones that Roy's wife makes and wraps in white paper. We sat in my truck in the gravel lot with the wipers going, and we enjoyed them. I noticed something at the time and thought it was funny. We were chewing at the same speed. Exactly the same speed. I would take a bite, she would take a bite, and our jaws were just synced up. And when I swallowed, she swallowed. I noticed it. Then I did it on purpose for a second and slowed way down and chewed like a cow. She slowed down too without ever looking at me. I laughed and said we shared the same brain cell, and she said, "Oh, are you watching my mouth when I eat?" and shoved my shoulder. There were other things I noticed and filed away as nothing at the time. She yawned when I yawned every single time within about a second. Anybody will tell you yawns are contagious, so that one didn't even register as a thing until later. Her hair was always dry. She had a green rain jacket, and the shoulders of it would be dark with water, and there would be droplets on her eyelashes. But the hair on top of her head would be dry as a bone. I assumed her hood had been up. That's what I assumed for those days. She never had a car either. Cormorant Lane to Sea Ridge is about 1.5 miles of shoulderless road with log trucks on it, and she apparently walked it in the dark and in that rain both directions. When I offered to drive her, she always said she liked walking, so I let it go. Again, a lonely 24-year-old guy I was. A girl was walking 1.5 miles through January storm to sit in a room with me, and that made me feel special. She never told me anything about herself that I hadn't told her first. That aspect I didn't put together for months. Sitting in my dad's basement in Vancouver in the spring, I went back over it. I'd say I dropped out of a program, and she would later tell me she dropped out of something. I said my parents split when I was 12 years old, and a couple days later she said her parents split when she was 11. I said the thing I missed the most was my grandma's house in Ridgefield. I explained how it smelled, and 2 days later she was telling me about her grandma's place in Colville. "Cedar chest," she said, "and coffee that had been sitting on the burner since breakfast." Everything about her, everything she would say was a mirror or a bounce back off of something I'd said. And I never caught it, because at the time I really thought it was just us having a lot in common, like I'd found the perfect woman. The night after the sandwiches was when I gave her the code. It came up naturally. "So, where are you going to be tomorrow?" she asked. 4212. "If I get there first, I stand out in the rain." 4409, I told her. "Oh, is that the code?" I nodded. "That's the code to all of them, isn't it?" I shook my head. "They're all different, actually. That one's just 4409. "Huh," she said, then went back to her book. After that, I gave her one almost every day. I'd say the address and the 4 digits, and she'd repeat them back to me once and never write them down and never got them wrong. Every night I did that, every single night, just handing over access to this woman. Day 14. I was at 4207. It was the house with the ceiling stain and the crooked lamp. I hadn't really wanted to sleep there, but the tank in that house was the second worst on the whole rotation, and I could not justify the drive. Nell had come over around 7 with a bag of the powdered donuts they sell at the gas station. We'd eaten most of them on the living room floor, with our backs against the couch. Around 11, she got up and said she was going to use the bathroom. I heard the door shut down the hall. The upstairs hallway runs 14 feet from the top of the stairs to the master door. I know the number well. I'd put tape on it in October, checking a baseboard gap for Sherry. I went up to get my phone charger. I got to the top of the stairs, and there was a woman standing at the other end. She was beautiful, young, 20-something, with dark hair and clear skin and a green jacket. She was standing there with her hands at her sides, looking at me. And she looked healthy. She looked completely and totally fine. But every single hair on my body stood straight up. I couldn't have told you why in that moment. All I knew was that my legs had gone loose, my mouth had gone dry. My entire body understood something my head was about 2 seconds behind on. Because at 14 feet, you can see a person's pores. You can see whether they blink or not. She was 14 feet away, and she looked like someone standing at the far end of a soccer field, smoothed out and filled in and too even. I said her name. "Nell?" I began to walk up towards her. I took 4 steps, but somehow, the door at the end, the woman ahead of me, neither of them got closer. The framed sand dollar on the right-hand wall was still on my right, at my shoulder. I should have passed it, but it was still there. I stopped. I remember reaching out and putting my hand flat on the wall, because it felt like the floor below me had disappeared. Then she smiled at me. A nice smile. That's when I heard a toilet flush. The bathroom door opened on my left, 4 feet away from me, and Nell came out drying her hands on her jeans, saying, "What are you doing?" And the hallway was 14 feet long again, and there was nobody at the end of it. I told her I'd gotten dizzy. She got me a glass of water and made me sit down on the stairs. She sat 2 steps below me with her hand on my knee. "When did you last eat something that wasn't a donut?" I had to actually think about it. "There was a burrito." "When?" "Yesterday." "You've gone white," she said. "Sit there. If the room starts spinning again, put your head down." She was kind about it, so nice to me. She never asked if I'd seen something. But if you find a guy standing in a hallway with his hand flat on the wall saying a name and looking up, you usually ask what he saw. But she asked what I'd eaten. The next afternoon, I was upstairs at 4118, the Ind House, at the big window in the master bedroom that looks out over the pines to the beach. Nell had gone down the access stair to look for glass floats, which she claimed washed up there, and which I'm now certain she'd never once looked for before I mentioned my grandma collected them. She was down on the sand about 150 yards out. She turned around and waved up at the window with both arms over her head, the big wave you do for someone far away. In the glass behind my own reflection, there was a woman standing in the bedroom. It was dark enough outside and bright enough inside that the glass had gone half mirror, with the bedroom laid over the beach. She was about 8 feet back near the closet, and pale. Her face was a gray-green, and the skin of it had come loose around her hairline, so there was a gap there. Her mouth was open, and the jaw hung crooked on one side, lower on the left, and her teeth were long due to the gums pulling back off of them. I turned around so fast, I hit my elbow on the window frame. But when I did, the room was empty. The closet doors were shut, and the carpet still had the vacuum lines on it. What I thought, standing there with my elbow ringing, was, thank God. Because Nell was down on the beach. I'd been looking right at her in the same second that I saw that figure, the figure that had looked like her last time. This time they were in 2 completely different places. So maybe, whatever that gray thing was, it's not her, I thought, and has nothing to do with her. And I could go downstairs and hug her, and everything would be fine. Seeing 2 of them at once means there's 2 of them. Late afternoon on the 16th day, I was at 4133 finishing up. I'd stepped out the slider onto the deck to dump a bucket over the rail. The sun was starting to set. The beach was empty except for something down by the creek mouth. I saw a person standing still down there facing the water, 200 yards away, same spot as the very first time I saw it. And I could see her face. I should not have been able to see her face that well from that distance. But just like the staircase incident, distance somehow warped. Because I could tell that the left side of her face had gone, and the socket had collapsed, so that the eye sat lower than the other. I could see the color of her skin, a mix of seafoam green and something pale and gross. Her hair was off her scalp in patches, and the hinge of her jaw was hanging. That was 200 yards, in the rain at sundown. You cannot see a person's eye socket at 200 yards. You can barely see if someone's got a hat on at that distance. So how was I able to see that? And what I saw made me so frightened that I hope I never feel that way again. What my gut told me, despite what my eyes saw, was that this thing was not 200 yards away. It only looked that way, but was much, much closer. I ran back inside and locked the slider, which wouldn't do much if someone really wanted to get inside. I stood in the kitchen and trembled. I went and got my duffel bag, and I threw my stuff in it, ready to leave. I'd sleep in the truck at Gale's. I would tell Sherry the roads were bad. I was just done tonight. Nell was standing in the front room by the lamp. I hadn't heard her come in. She said, "Where are you going with that?" I told her everything. I started with the dry tank at Bell Road, going right through the lamp and the beach and the hallway, standing there with a duffel bag in my hand like some kid running away from home. She didn't laugh, and she didn't seem scared. She put her hands in her jacket pockets and thought for a second, then said, "How many of these houses are empty right now?" "All of them. 43. 43 houses with nobody in them." She let that sit for a moment. "Do any of them have a busted window? A door that doesn't latch?" "Probably. Bell Road's got a sliding door that sticks." "So, somebody's living out here." I began to say something, but she kept going. "Look, it's January. It's the end of the road, and it's been raining for 2 weeks straight. If there's a woman out here sleeping in one of these houses, what do you think she looks like by now? She'll look bad, rough, exactly as bad as what you're telling me." "But her face was... You saw her at 200 yards. It wasn't fully dark yet, though. Well, it was dusk in a rainstorm." She crouched in front of me, so she was looking up at me. "You've been getting up at 5. You've been doing 11-hour days for multiple weeks. You told me you talk out loud in these houses because it's too quiet in them. Your head is just filling things in, Danny. It's filling them in with the worst things it's got, and that's a completely normal thing for a head to do in your situation." I was wordless. "If you drive that road tonight in this, you're going to put the truck in the ditch on a blind turn. No one's going to find you till Monday." I put the duffel bag down. That's the moment. If there's one moment I'd take back, it's that one. And you'll soon understand why. I'd been sleeping through the rain for 2 weeks. Those Sea Ridge houses have shallow attics and a hard roof, so it was loud in there. And it seemed to get louder when the wind came around. After a couple of days, you stop hearing it. The same as you would stop hearing your refrigerator hum. I woke up at some point in the dark because it was gone. It wasn't quieter, it was just gone. I could hear the blood in my own ears. I lay there and thought the storm had finally broke, and I was actually happy for about 4 seconds. Then I sat up, and I could hear it. It was hammering. It was absolutely coming down out there. I could hear it on the roof over the hallway and on the roof over the far bedroom. I could hear it hitting the deck downstairs and running in the gutter and coming off the downspout onto the gravel. Everywhere, except the room I was in. Over that one room, the roof was silent, and the sound started again right at the doorway. At the time, Nell was asleep beside me on her side, facing away. I got up and went to the doorway and stood with my head in the hall. It was loud out there. I then moved away 8 inches, pulling my head back into the room. It was gone. I did this 3 or 4 times to be sure. I put my ear against the wall, and there was nothing on that side of it. I figured there had to be something up in the attic over that room. Insulation pushed around, or a tarp, or something somebody left up there. I got the flashlight, and I stood on the bed, going over the ceiling looking for the access hatch. There wasn't one in that bedroom, but there was a hatch out in the hallway. I got back in bed because the only other option was to be somewhere else in that house alone. I didn't want to do that. I lay there with my eyes open until it came back. And it did. It came back all at once. I looked at my phone then. It was 4:51 a.m. Nell rolled over about a minute later, placing her arm over me, saying, "You're freezing," with her eyes shut. It was day 17 of that non-stop rain. I did 9 houses. My hands had been wet for so long that the skin on my fingertips had gone soft and white. I ate a gas station burrito for lunch, standing up in some stranger's kitchen. Sherry called and told me an owner in Chandler, Arizona was threatening to pull his house from the program because of a mildew smell, asking if I could put some vinegar on it. I said sure, and I did. Nell met me at 4319 that evening. We lay on the couch and watched about 90 minutes of a movie on my laptop with the sound on low, and I fell asleep with my head on her chest. I could hear her heartbeat. It was slow and steady. I just lay there listening to it before falling asleep, and after a while I noticed something. It was beating exactly along with mine. It wasn't near or roughly mine, but every beat was at the same time as one of mine. I've had my head on somebody's chest before. I've never heard a heartbeat do that. I thought, two people's hearts can't just line up like that. But because I was half asleep and stupid and happy, I tested it and held my breath. If you hold your breath, your heart slows down. When I did that, I felt my heart rate go down a little bit. I held it until my chest hurt. About 50 seconds, I think. And the whole time her heart came down with mine, step for step, beat for beat, until it was going at that low, heavy pace. Then I let go, taking a big breath. My beats and hers came back up at the same time. I lifted my head and looked at her. She was watching the movie with her chin tucked down, and she looked at me, saying, "What?" "Nothing," I said, and I laid my head back down. Something was wrong, and I didn't want it to be real. I woke up in the middle of the night at around 2:30. I wasn't sure what woke me. Nell was on her side facing away from me on the other half of the bed, about 1.5 feet of space between us. There was that little bit of light you get, even in a storm at night. And she was laughing. It was quiet and low, like a little laugh you do when you're remembering something funny. 3 or 4 laughs, then a pause, then 3 or 4 more. It was completely relaxed and completely normal sounding. But it terrified me in that moment. You see, when you laugh, your body moves. Your ribs, shoulders, your back, even a small laugh is noticeable by other people. But as I heard this laugh coming from her body was absolutely still. I was looking at her shoulder against the window, and her back under the blanket, and the sound was coming out of her, I was sure of it. And yet no part of her moved. I did not move, and I tried not to breathe too loudly. This went on for quite some time. I want to say 4 or 5 minutes, but I have no idea truthfully. Eventually it did stop, and she said something then, though I couldn't tell you what it was exactly. It didn't sound like words. After that, there was nothing. I lay there until it got light. Then I got up and did my houses as usual. If you're asking why I didn't run then, it was because I was in love. And when you're in love, you can ignore so many red flags. I had my last night at 4212 Sea Ridge Drive. Nell was inside by the time I got there. Of course she was. She was in the kitchen with the paper bag she'd started at the last house. She'd made tea in one of the mugs from the cabinet, which I would have gotten in trouble for if Sherry found out. We had a nice night. That's what really kills me here. We had a great night. She was funny. She made fun of my clipboard. "So, what happens to you in April?" she asked. "When everyone comes back?" Sherry says there's turnover work, cleaning between rentals. "And if there isn't?" "Then I go home, I guess." She was quiet for a second. "I don't want you to go home," she said. At one point, she was standing at the counter. I came up behind her, placing my arms around her. She leaned back into me. It was the most comfortable I'd ever felt in my life. We went to bed around midnight. I fell asleep on my back, and I don't remember having any dreams. When I woke up, I was on my side against her back, with my arm over her, my knees behind her knees. My face was right in the back of her hair, and the room was black except for the little green light on the smoke detector. But there was something wrong. I could feel breath hitting my face. It was slow and warm, coming in a rhythm, right on my cheek and nose, very close. My eyes were open and I was looking at the back of her head from about 3 inches away. How could there be breathing on my face? It wasn't a moment of dawning horror at the time. My brain was extremely calm and extremely slow. I thought about the smoke detector, whether it could be a fan or a vent. I thought about my own breath coming back at me off the pillow, and about the window, whether it was cracked and we didn't realize it. I went through all these explanations, one at a time, lying perfectly still, and every single one of those explanations did not hold up. I could feel that breathing, moving the little hairs by my ear. Her back was against my chest. I could feel her. I could feel her shoulder blade against my sternum, and my arm was over her ribs. And I was beginning to realize that something only a few inches from my face was breathing in and out, with a slight catch on the inhale, like somebody with a cold. I did the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. I didn't know what else to do in that situation, but I had to know. Anyone would have to know. I didn't decide to do it, my hand just did it. I lifted my hand off her ribs, slowly so as not to wake her, and I reached up, putting my fingers into the hair at the back of her head, and gently, I began to part it. She was smiling at me. There was a face underneath her hair, a face on the back of her head. It was under the hair, about where the base of her skull should be. It was her face, the real one, the one I knew with the chipped corner on her upper left tooth. Her eyes were wide open. They were staring at me. They'd been on me the whole time, waiting for me to part that hair. Only inches away in the dark, wide open. She was smiling so wide that the skin at the corners of her eyes was creased, and the breath came out of her mouth onto mine. My fingers were in her hair on either side, holding it open. Then she spoke.
Hi.
I pulled my hand out of her hair quickly, and the hair fell shut over it, becoming just the back of her head again. I went backward off that bed like a bullet, hard enough that I came down on the floor on my tailbone, and I could feel it up in my teeth. Then I kept going, pushing back on my hands and my heels until I was against the wall under the window. There was nowhere else to go. I could hardly get a breath in. I'd never had that happen before. I was pulling at the air and none of it was getting down. Then, she sat up. She did it so slowly, no jolt to it, no surprise. She rose up without facing me, and when she was fully upright, she stayed that way for a couple of seconds, her shoulders square and her head straight. Then she went forward on hands and knees on the mattress and started across the bed away from me, toward the far side. I was down on the floor with my back on the wall, so my eyes were about level with the top of the mattress. All I could see of her was her head and the top of her back going across. She never turned around, not for a second of it, and I never saw the front of her. She made it to the far edge, and she went over. That's a drop of about 2 feet onto carpet. A grown person coming down off a bed onto their hands and knees will make a sound, whether they want to or not. But I didn't hear anything at all. I was sitting low enough to see straight under that bed. Those beds sit up off the floor about 8 inches, and there's nothing under them. No drawers, no storage boxes, no bed skirt, just carpet and the 4 legs. Trust me, I've been under those beds in that development with a flashlight, looking for mouse droppings, wet spots, and mold. So I had a clear view of 8 inches of open carpet running the whole way across to the far wall. But nothing came down onto it. No hands, no knees, no falling knell. I watched her go over that edge, and I never saw her come down. Then, nothing happened for a long time. The only light in that room was the green one on the smoke detector. My eyes were well adjusted to the lack of light, but still heavily depended on the blinks it gave off about every 30 seconds. And I know I sat there through several of those blinks. I then thought about the door. The door was on the same wall I was against, down at the other end, and getting to it meant standing up and crossing the open floor at the foot of the bed. I couldn't do it. I don't know if it was fear, or if it was the idea that getting to that knob meant I would have to turn my back to the far side of that room. I got chills then, just imagining it. I kept looking under the bed instead, over and over, and it was the same emptiness every time. All I knew was where she wasn't. I forced myself up then, because I had to know where she went. I did it slow, keeping my hand on the wall as I went up. My legs were a mess. I made it back to my side of the bed, placing my hand on the footboard, and I stopped. Going around the corner of it meant walking into the strip of floor on her side, and that I still couldn't see into. A few feet of carpet between the bed and the wall, and I'd be standing in it before I could look at it. So I crawled back up onto the bed instead. I put one knee on the mattress, and the whole thing dipped. The frame made a noise, and I stopped. I waited, and nothing happened. I then put another knee on it. I crawled out to about the middle of it on my hands and knees, over the sheet, over the dent where the two of us had been lying 20 minutes before. And the closer I got to her side, the slower I went. I got to the edge. I put one hand down on the mattress right at the seam, and I leaned over her side of the bed, looking at the floor. There was carpet, and there was the leg of the nightstand, and there was no one down there. At that exact moment, I felt breath on the back of my neck. I screamed. I've never made that sound before. Didn't even know I could. I came off that mattress and got myself turned around at the same time. I was expecting to be looking straight at her. But there was nothing on that bed. The sheet was pushed down where the two of us had been, and there was a dent in her pillow. But that was all. I hurried over to the door, backing up to it so I could face the room. I put my back flat against that door. I scoured that room with my eyes. I took my time doing it. I wasn't going into a dark hallway or staying in there any longer without knowing where she went. It's not a big room. I'm not sure how you're imagining it, but it's not a very big room. There's the bed, a dresser with nothing on it, and about 4 feet of open floor down either side. Then there's the closet. That's the whole room. The closet doors were shut. Surely she couldn't be in there. I stood with my back on that door for a minute or two, looking at the closet, scared the doors would fly open and there she would be, gliding towards me. But that didn't happen. All the while I was working up the courage to open the door behind me. But that courage didn't come. Not yet. So I stayed put, standing there, watching every inch of that room that I could. I then reached over sideways, without taking my eyes off of that room. I felt around until I found it. The light switch. I flicked it. The light came on. This wasn't some scary movie where the lights suddenly don't come on. The place had power just fine, and the light came on as it should. There was nothing in the room. Just furniture. Bed, dresser, carpet, 2 closet doors. Everything as it should be. It was so ordinary and empty. And now I could see every bit of it all at once. I put my shoulder blades back on that door, and I got some breath into me at last. I remember thinking in those exact words that I was going to be okay, until 2 hands came over my shoulders from behind me. My back was on that door. My shoulder blades were touching it. I had been standing against it for a couple of minutes by then. There was nothing behind me but a closed door. Those hands came down over the front of my shoulders, onto my chest. They were wet, and it wasn't water. There was something on them with thickness to it. Those hands dragged across my skin, and I could feel my skin going tacky where it touched me. And that smell came at the same time. That smell of what washes up on the beach after a storm and just lies there in a line on the sand for weeks. Then both hands came up off my chest, and the fingers went in my mouth. I didn't have time to do anything about it. They went in past my teeth, and I felt the knuckles on my tongue, and I felt one of them at the back of my throat. It tasted like a crab pot that's been sitting out in the sun. I went forward. I don't know if I jumped or if my legs did it without me. I came down on hands and knees on the carpet in front of the bed, and I began to vomit. But nothing came up. I kept heaving anyway, 4 or 5 times, my head hanging down and my hands flat on the floor. I turned around then and looked back at the door. There was nobody there, of course there wasn't, and the door was still shut. I stayed down there heaving and spitting on the carpet, not bringing anything up. At that moment, I wasn't paying any attention at all to where I was in that room. I'd gone forward maybe 6 feet. My back was nearly touching the end of the bed. But then the light started to go. I thought it was the light bulb, that the bulb was going out on me all of a sudden. Darkness came down from the top of my vision, and it was coming down slow and even all the way across. It took me a second to realize. It was hair. Hair came down over my face from right above me, and it kept coming. It went past my eyes and down my chin. She was up on that bed right behind me, leaning out over the top, just over my head. She spoke only one more word, and that word was, "Stay." I practically tackled the door then, barging into it full force before I ever got the knob turned. I put my shoulder into it, and the top corner went in. One of the hinges tore out of the jamb with a sound like a board coming off a pallet. Then it was open. I was in the hallway. I ran down the stairs, missing the last 3, and coming down on my side on the floor at the bottom. I got up. My keys were on the kitchen counter where I'd left them. I ran out the front door after grabbing them, and I got into the truck, driving as fast as I could. Throughout all of this, I was in my underwear. No shoes, no jacket. The entire way up the ridge road, I kept feeling something behind the seat. I wasn't hearing anything, and I never once looked back in the mirror. I don't know what I would have done if I had. It was on the back of my neck and across the top of my shoulders. I'd put my hand back there and feel nothing, but then 30 seconds later it would be there again. I did this the entire way over the ridge, taking those blind turns way too fast in the dark, one hand constantly going behind my own head, over and over. I got to Gale's a little before 6, going up the outside stairs. I put some clothes on, and I did that without turning on a single light. I was in too much of a hurry, too scared. Problem was, my wallet was on the nightstand at 4212, the house I had just run away from. I knew exactly where it was, but I wasn't going back for it. There was about $60 cash in the drawer by the sink at my place, so I took that. I didn't leave Gale a note, and I didn't call Sherry. I drove straight to my dad's, arriving a little after 10 in the morning. He opened the door and looked at me and said, "Okay," and stepped back to let me in. Somebody had to go out to 4212 to fix that door. That's a hinge and probably the jamb and probably the whole slab. It would be coming out of Sherry's pocket, or out of the owner's. But I wasn't going back there. I still owe her for the door. Well, that was a first. A love story / work story / ghost story? And I don't know about all of you, but that gave me some serious Obsession vibes. If any of you have not seen that movie yet, go do it. It's freaking creepy, and a fun ride. I never knew a 5-foot woman could be so creepy, till that movie and apparently this story. Good night. Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of Tales from the Break Room. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. You can send me your scary work-related stories over at eeriecast.com/submit. And you can support the show by becoming a member over at erie.fm, where you can listen to all our shows without ads if you're a premium member, and unlock hours of bonus stories, podcasts, and audiobooks. Your membership helps us stay afloat, and it's very, very much appreciated. Till next time, everyone, I've got to clock out, but I'll be back again real soon.